Welcome. As the day recedes and the quiet deepens, we invite you to embark on a journey through a life profoundly lived. Tonight we will gently explore the extensive tapestry of Nelson Mandela's existence, a figure whose name resonates across continents and generations. This is not a tale for haste, nor for the sharp edges of the waking world, but rather an invitation to a calm and unhurried contemplation. Allow your thoughts to drift, to settle, and to find repose as we trace the path of a man who moved from a rural village in the Eastern Cape to the global stage. We will observe the intricate weave of his early years, the profound impact of his education, and the circumstances that shaped his unwavering commitment to justice. Our purpose is to present the factual narrative of his long and complex journey, allowing the story to unfold at a measured pace, much like the slow turning of the earth. There is no need for active analysis or the effort of memory. Simply allow the details, the events, and the quiet weight of history to wash over you. The intent is to foster a state of deep tranquility, to create an atmosphere where understanding can emerge without strain, and where the mind can find a gentle pathway towards rest. As we delve into the various chapters of his life, his struggles, his resilience, his leadership, may the steady rhythm of this narration guide you towards a peaceful slumber, leaving you refreshed and perhaps with a quiet sense of historical insight. Let us begin this shared moment of reflection and quiet discovery. On July 18th, 1918, in a small village nestled within the Eastern Cape of South Africa, a child was born who would later become known to the world as Nelson Mandela. His birth name, however, was Rolihlahla. In the Xhosa language, this name carries a particular resonance, often translated as pulling the branch of a tree, or more colloquially, troublemaker. It was a name that, in time, would prove to be remarkably prescient, though its initial bestowal was simply a part of a rich cultural tradition. The village of Mvezo, where Rolihlahla Mandela first drew breath, was then a place of profound quietude and deep-rooted custom. It lay along the banks of the Mbasha River, a serpentine waterway carving its path through rolling hills and verdant valleys. The landscape was characterized by its natural beauty, expansive skies, the distant calls of indigenous birds, and the gentle rustle of tall grasses in the breeze. Here, that life unfolded in harmony with the rhythms of nature, guided by ancestral practices and the wisdom passed down through generations. Homes were typically rondavels, circular dwellings constructed from local materials, their thatched roofs blending seamlessly with the surrounding environment. The air was often scented with the subtle aroma of wood smoke from cooking fires, mingling with the earthy fragrance of the veld. Children played freely amidst the livestock, their laughter carried on the soft wind, while elders gathered to share stories and impart knowledge. It was a world largely untouched by the external complexities that would later define much of the century. Mvezo in 1918 was a place of communal living, where the bonds of family and clan provided the primary structure of existence. It was within this tranquil, traditional setting that the early seeds of a remarkable life were sown. Rolihlahla's early life in Mvezo was shaped significantly by the presence and influence of his father, Gadla Henry Mfakanyizwa. Gadla was a figure of considerable standing within his community, a local chief of the Mvezo region. His authority was not merely titular, it was deeply embedded in the social and political fabric of the Thembu people, a prominent Xhosa ethnic group. As a chief, Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa held responsibilities that extended beyond his immediate family. He served as a councillor to the acting paramount chief of the Thembu, Yongintaba Dalindyebo, a position that placed him close to the heart of the royal house. This role was not one of mere advice. It involved active participation in the governance and legal processes of the Thembu nation. He presided over local disputes, administered justice according to customary law, and acted as a mediator within the community. His decisions were respected, and his presence commanded a quiet deference. The family's standing, therefore, was one of quiet prominence. While not of the highest royalty, they were part of the ruling lineage, a fact that imbued young Rolihlahla with an early understanding of leadership, duty, and the intricate workings of traditional governance. The household operated with a sense of order, reflecting the structured nature of the broader community. Daily life, though simple in its material aspects, was rich in cultural practice and a clear hierarchy of responsibilities. Gadla Henrimpakaniswa was a man who embodied the traditions of his people. He was known for his firm resolve and his adherence to the established ways. This environment of traditional authority and communal responsibility provided Rolihlahla with his very first lessons in leadership and the importance of serving one's people. It was a foundation built upon centuries of custom, offering a stable and predictable world for a young boy to navigate. While his father, Gadla Henry Mfakanizwa, represented the established order and traditional authority, young Rolihlahla also experienced the gentle yet profound influence of his mother, Nosekeni Fani. Her presence in his life provided a contrasting yet complementary foundation to his upbringing. Nosekeni Fani was devout Methodist, a faith that had steadily gained adherents within the Xhosa communities of the Eastern Cape. Her adherence to Methodism introduced a new dimension to the household's spiritual landscape. While traditional Xhosa customs and beliefs permeated daily life, Nosekeni brought the tenets of Christian faith into Rolihlahla's awareness. She was a quiet woman, known for her piety and her calm demeanour. Her influence was not exerted through overt command, but through example and consistent devotion. She instilled in her son an early appreciation for the principles of compassion, forgiveness, and the importance of a moral compass guided by spiritual conviction. This dual influence of traditional custom and Christian faith was a significant aspect of Rolihlahla's formative years. He observed his father upholding ancient laws and practices, participating in rituals and discussions rooted in ancestral wisdom. Simultaneously, he witnessed his mother's steadfast commitment to her Christian beliefs, attending church services and living by the precepts of her chosen religion. This exposure to two distinct yet coexisting spiritual frameworks fostered an early capacity for understanding diverse perspectives. Nosekeni Fani's gentle nature provided a nurturing counterpoint to the more formal structure represented by his father. She offered a sense of warmth and emotional security, teaching through quiet guidance rather than strict instruction. Her faith provided a moral bedrock, emphasizing values that would subtly resonate throughout his life's journey. It was within this interplay of traditional Xhosa life and the burgeoning influence of Methodism shaped by his parents that Rolihlahla began to perceive the complexities of the world around him. A significant shift occurred in Rolihlahla's young life when his father, Gadla Henry Mfakanizwa, was removed from his chieftainship at Mvezo. This event, stemming from a dispute with a white magistrate, led the family to relocate to the smaller, more humble village of Kunu. It was in Kunu that Rolihlahla would spend much of his childhood, a period he would later recall with warmth and nostalgia, despite the family's reduced circumstances. Life in Kunu was characterized by its simplicity and its deep connection to the natural world. Here, the rhythms of the day were dictated by the sun and the needs of the livestock. Rolihlahla, like many boys his age, was entrusted with the responsibility of herding cattle and sheep. These were not mere chores, but integral aspects of communal life, teaching patience, observation, and a profound respect for animals and the land. He spent countless hours in the open fields, guiding the herds, learning the paths, and observing the changing seasons. Beyond his duties, Kunu offered ample opportunities for childhood play. Traditional games were a cornerstone of social interaction among the children. They engaged in stick fighting, a mock combat that honed agility and strategy, often using sticks fashioned from tree branches. They crafted sleds from aloes and slid down hillsides, their laughter echoing across the valleys. Swimming in the cold, clear rivers was a favourite pastime during the warmer months. These activities fostered strong bonds of camaraderie and taught valuable lessons about cooperation and friendly competition. The community in Kunu was close-knit, bound by kinship and shared experiences. Every adult was, in a sense, a parent to every child, offering guidance, discipline, and affection. Life was lived collectively, with resources often shared and support readily offered. The absence of modern conveniences meant a greater reliance on each other and on the land itself. This pastoral existence, simple yet rich in human connection and natural beauty, deeply impressed upon Rolihlahla the values of community, resilience, and the enduring spirit of his people. It was a childhood spent in the embrace of tradition, under the wide African sky. The trajectory of Rolihlahla's life began to subtly shift with his first encounter with formal education. It was his mother, Nosekeni Fanny, who made the decision for him to attend a local missionary school, a small, simple institution located not far from Kunu. I.e., this act marked a significant departure from the traditional Tembu upbringing he had known, introducing him to a world beyond the familiar rhythms of the village and the cattle kraal. On his very first day at school, a pivotal moment occurred, one that would ripple throughout his entire existence. The teacher, Miss Mdingane, a woman of quiet authority, stood before the class of young Xhosa children. It was a common practice in those times, within missionary schools across the region, for African children to be given English names. This was often done for convenience, to make communication easier for European missionaries and administrators, and was seen as a step towards integration into the colonial education system. Miss Mdingan proceeded through the class, assigning each child an English name. When she reached Rolihlahla, Owa, she bestowed upon him the name Nelson. From that moment forward, Rolihlahla would carry this new identifier. While he continued to be known by his birth name within the intimate circles of his family and village, Nelson became his public and institutional name, the one by which he would be recognized in the wider world. This seemingly simple act of naming held a deeper significance. It represented Rolihlahla's initial, tangible encounter with Western influence and the broader colonial structures that permeated South African society. The missionary school itself, with its structured lessons and foreign curriculum, was a direct product of this influence. Learning to read and write in English, alongside his native Xhosa, opened new avenues of thought and understanding. It was the beginning of a dual existence, navigating both the rich traditions of his Thembu heritage and the increasingly pervasive presence of European culture and education. The name Nelson became a quiet symbol of this unfolding duality, a bridge between two worlds, a profound and sorrowful chapter unfolded in Rolihlahla's young life when, at the tender age of 9, his father, Gadla Henrimfakanyiswa, passed away. The loss of his father left a deep void, not only within the family, but also in Rolihlahla's personal world, marking the end of his innocent childhood in Kunu. His father's illness, a lung ailment, had progressed, ultimately claiming his life and leaving his mother, Nosekeni, to face the challenges of widowhood with several young children. In accordance with Xhosa custom and the specific arrangements his father had made before his passing, and Rolihlahla's guardianship was formally transferred, he was to be placed under the care of Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. Jongintaba was not merely a distant relative, He was the paramount chief and a pivotal figure in the Thembu hierarchy, residing at the Great Place in Mkhekezweni. This arrangement was a testament to the close bonds between Rolilala's father and the royal house, a connection forged through service and kinship. The transition from the rustic, familiar surroundings of Kunu to the bustling, more formal environment of Mkhekezweni was a significant shift for the young boy. Mkhekezweni, known as the Great Place, was the traditional seat of Thembu power and administration. It was a vibrant hub where important decisions were made, disputes were settled, and the intricate protocols of Thembu royalty were meticulously observed. Here, Rolelahla, now more frequently referred to as Nelson in his schooling, would be raised alongside Yongintaba's own children, sharing in their daily lives and education. This move was transformative. It introduced him to a world of heightened political awareness and traditional governance at the highest levels. He would observe Yongintaba presiding over tribal councils, listening to the intricate arguments and the wisdom of the elders. These observations, though perhaps not fully understood by a young boy, began to cultivate in him an early appreciation for justice, leadership, and the art of persuasion. The Great Place, therefore, became a new crucible for his development, far removed from the simple herding life of Kunu, and setting the stage for a different kind of learning and experience. Life at Mkhekezweni, the Great Place, offered Nelson a distinctly different existence from his early years in Kunu. Under the watchful eye of Jongintaba Dalindyebo, the acting regent, his days were structured around both formal education and an immersive apprenticeship in Thembu governance. He attended a local mission school, where his studies deepened his understanding of the English language and Western subjects, broadening his intellectual horizons beyond the traditional Xhosa oral histories. This academic rigour was a foundational element of his upbringing during this period, instilling in him a discipline for learning. Beyond the schoolhouse, the true education at Mkhekezweni unfolded within the royal court proceedings. Nelson was a quiet observer, or often sitting in the regent's court, listening intently as tribal elders, headmen, and ordinary people presented their cases, grievances, and petitions. He witnessed Jongintaba preside with a quiet authority, listening patiently to all sides before delivering a judgment. These sessions were not merely about resolving disputes. They were living lessons in traditional justice, where the emphasis was often on consensus, reconciliation, and the maintenance of community harmony rather than punitive measures. From these observations, Nelson absorbed invaluable lessons in leadership and the intricate art of governance. He learned the importance of hearing every voice, of careful deliberation, and of seeking a resolution that upheld the dignity of all parties. He also became acutely aware of the power of oratory. The Thembu court was a place where eloquent speakers could sway opinion, where arguments were presented with passion and precision. This exposure to traditional Xhosa rhetorical traditions, combined with his Western schooling, began to shape his own burgeoning abilities in communication and persuasion, skills that would prove profoundly significant in his later life. The Great Place, therefore, served as a unique university, blending formal academics with a profound, practical education in the responsibilities and complexities of leadership. The daily rhythm of life at the Great Place allowed Nelson Mandela an unparalleled vantage point into the heart of traditional Thembu justice. From his quiet observations within the tribal council meetings, the seeds of a profound understanding of fairness and equity began to take root within him, but he sat, often unnoticed, as the regent Yongintaba carefully navigated the complex web of community disputes. These were not abstract legal theories, but real-life conflicts touching upon land, livestock, marriage, and personal honour. Nelson witnessed a system that prioritized open discussion and the meticulous gathering of all perspectives. Before any decision was made, Every person present, from the accuser to the accused and any witnesses, was given ample opportunity to speak without interruption. The regent would listen, his expression often thoughtful, absorbing the nuances of each testimony. This patient approach to hearing all sides instilled in Nelson a deep appreciation for the value of comprehensive understanding before judgment. He saw that true justice often lay not in swift pronouncements, but in the careful, deliberate unravelling of a situation. The administration of justice in the Themba court was also a masterclass in leadership responsibilities. Nelson observed that Yongintaba did not merely issue decrees, he facilitated a process. His role was less that of an imposing judge and more that of a wise mediator, guiding the community towards a resolution that aimed to restore balance and prevent future discord. The regent's decisions were usually rooted in custom and precedent, yet also tempered by an understanding of the specific human circumstances involved. This blend of tradition and empathy left a lasting impression. These early experiences taught Nelson that effective leadership was inextricably linked to the ability to resolve conflict peacefully and justly. When he saw how a leader bore the heavy responsibility of maintaining harmony within the community, of ensuring that even the most minor disputes were handled with dignity and respect for all individuals. The values of fairness, patient listening, and the pursuit of collective well-being, demonstrated repeatedly in the regent's court, became foundational principles in Nelson Mandela's developing worldview, shaping his approach to the concept of justice for the rest of his life. In 1937, Nelson Mandela embarked on the next phase of his educational journey, leaving the familiar confines of Mkhitarweni for the Clarkbury Boarding Institute. This move represented a significant step into a more structured and formalised academic environment. Clarkbury, a renowned Methodist mission school, offered a curriculum focused on English, Xhosa, history, and geography, providing a broader intellectual landscape than his previous schooling. The institute, with its numerous students from various Themba clans and beyond, also introduced him to a wider range of perspectives and personalities. Life at Clarkbury was disciplined, characterised by regular study hours, communal living, and a strong emphasis on Christian values. Nelson applied himself diligently to his studies, demonstrating a particular aptitude for history and the English language. He began to encounter narratives and ideas that expanded his understanding of the world, moving beyond the immediate concerns of his rural upbringing and the Thembu royal court. The academic rigour fostered a developing sense of critical inquiry and a growing awareness of the larger historical forces at play in South Africa and globally. Following his time at Clarkbury, Nelson advanced to Healdtown Methodist College in 1939, another prestigious institution known for educating many prominent black South Africans. Healdtown represented an even higher level of secondary education, preparing students for university entrance. Here, the academic demands intensified, and Nelson continued to excel, particularly in his chosen subjects. The college environment was intellectually stimulating, encouraging debates and discussions among the students about various topics, including the social and political realities of their time. At Healdtown, Nelson's awareness of the broader world deepened considerably. He encountered fellow students from different regions of the country, each bringing their own experiences and insights into the pervasive issues of racial segregation and injustice. These interactions, combined with his academic pursuits, began to solidify his understanding of the systemic nature of the challenges facing black South Africans. The seeds of a burgeoning political consciousness were being sown amidst the quiet halls and classrooms of these esteemed institutions, preparing him for a future far removed from the pastoral tranquility of his youth. In 1940, Nelson Mandela matriculated and gained admission to the University College of Fort Hare, a pivotal moment in his intellectual and political development. Fort Hare held a unique and revered status in South Africa. It was, for many decades, the only residential university college for black African students in the country, and indeed one of the very few in all of sub-Saharan Africa. Attending Fort Hare was a privilege, a testament to his academic achievement, and a gateway to a world of advanced learning. The university was situated near Alice in the Eastern Cape, a tranquil setting that belied the vibrant intellectual ferment within its walls. Fort Hare attracted the brightest young minds from across South Africa and other British colonies, fostering an atmosphere rich in academic discourse and critical thought. The curriculum spanned a range of disciplines, including history, politics, law, and various sciences, providing a rigorous and comprehensive education. Nelson initially enrolled for a Bachelor of Arts degree, focusing on English, anthropology, native administration, and Roman Dutch law. The intellectual atmosphere at Fort Hare was transformative. Professors, many of whom were liberal-minded and deeply committed to education, encouraged open debate and the questioning of prevailing ideas. Nelson was exposed to diverse philosophical and political theories, engaging with concepts of colonialism, nationalism, and the emerging ideologies of liberation. This exposure broadened his intellectual horizons significantly, challenging some of his earlier assumptions and introducing him to more complex understandings of power and society. Crucially, Fort Hare was a crucible for future leaders. Nelson found himself among an extraordinary cohort of students, many of whom would go on to play significant roles in the anti-apartheid struggle and in the post-colonial governments of various African nations. He interacted with individuals like Oliver Tambo, whom he would later form a lifelong political partnership with, and Robert Sobukwe, a future leader of the Pan-Africanist Congress. These encounters with diverse and often brilliant young minds, sharing common experiences of racial discrimination, yet holding varied political perspectives, proved profoundly influential. Fort Hare became a crossroads where intellectual curiosity met nascent political awareness, shaping the trajectory of Nelson Mandela's life, and in turn the history of South Africa. Within the stimulating environment of Fort Hare, Nelson Mandela's political consciousness began to crystallize, moving from abstract ideas of justice to concrete acts of defiance. His time there was not solely dedicated to academic pursuits. It also became the setting for his first significant engagement in organized protest. This experience, though seemingly minor in the grand scheme of his life, offered an early glimpse into his burgeoning leadership qualities and his unwavering commitment to challenging perceived injustice. In 1940, during his initial year at the university, a student grievance regarding the quality of food in the dining halls escalated into a wider protest. The students felt their concerns were being ignored, and the administration's response was deemed inadequate. This issue, while focused on immediate living conditions, tapped into a broader undercurrent of dissatisfaction among the students, many of whom were already acutely aware of the systemic inequalities pervading South African society. Nelson, still a relatively new student, found himself drawn into this movement. He was elected to the Students' Representative Council, SRC, and, as a member, became involved in articulating the students' demands. There, when the administration refused to address their concerns to their satisfaction, a significant portion of the student body decided to boycott classes. Nelson, alongside his peers, participated actively in this boycott, demonstrating solidarity and a collective will to be heard. The university authorities, however, took a firm stance. They issued an ultimatum: either the students cease their protest and return to classes, or face expulsion or suspension. Nelson, along with a number of other students, refused to back down. He believed in the righteousness of their cause and the importance of standing firm against what they perceived as unfair treatment. This principled refusal led to his suspension from Fort Hare in 1940, an early consequence of his burgeoning political activism. It was a clear demonstration of his willingness to accept personal sacrifice for a collective cause, a trait that would define much of his later life. Following his suspension from Fort Hare, Nelson Mandela returned to the royal court in Kunu, a place of traditional authority and expectation. However, his experiences at university had begun to shape a different path for him, one that diverged from the life his guardian, Chief Yongintaba, envisioned. The chief, in accordance with custom, had arranged a marriage for Nelson, a decision intended to secure his future within the tribal structure. Yet Nelson, with his growing sense of individual agency and a burgeoning desire for a life beyond the confines of rural tradition, found himself increasingly resistant to this preordained destiny. He confided in his cousin, Justice, who was also facing an arranged marriage. Together they made a momentous decision to leave the familiar world of the Thembu heartland and seek a new life in Johannesburg, the bustling economic hub of South Africa. This was not merely an escape from an unwanted marriage. It was a deliberate step towards greater autonomy and an immersion into the wider world, a world where the struggles against racial injustice were more acutely felt and actively resisted. Their journey to Johannesburg was undertaken with a sense of quiet determination. They travelled by train, a long and arduous passage that carried them away from the pastoral landscapes of the Eastern Cape into the industrial sprawl of the Witwatersrand. Upon their arrival, the city presented a stark contrast to their rural upbringing. Johannesburg was a labyrinth of noise, movement, and a bewildering array of people from different backgrounds. The initial period was marked by significant challenges. They arrived with little money and no immediate prospects. The search for accommodation and employment was difficult, compounded by the discriminatory practices that limited opportunities for black Africans in the city. Nelson and Justice found themselves navigating a harsh urban landscape, far removed from the protective embrace of the Thembu royal court. Yet this very struggle would further forge Nelson's resilience and broaden his understanding of the realities faced by many of his countrymen. Johannesburg in the early 1940s was a city of stark contrasts, a sprawling metropolis built upon the gold mines that had drawn people from across the continent and beyond. For Nelson Mandela, arriving from the quiet, communal life of Kunu, it was a profound immersion into an entirely new dimension of existence. The city pulsed with an energy he had never known, a cacophony of languages, the relentless rhythm of industry, and the constant flow of human activity. Yet, beneath this vibrant surface lay a meticulously structured system of segregation. The cityscape itself was a physical manifestation of racial division. The towering buildings of the city centre, predominantly occupied by white businesses and residents, stood in sharp relief to the sprawling, often informal settlements on the periphery. These townships, like Alexandra and later Soweto, were where the majority of the black urban population resided, living under overcrowded conditions and with limited access to resources, yet brimming with a unique cultural vitality. This burgeoning black urban population was a critical aspect of Johannesburg's character. People had migrated from rural areas across South Africa, and indeed from neighbouring countries, drawn by the promise, however illusory, of work and a better life. They brought with them diverse traditions, languages and experiences, creating a melting pot of African cultures. This concentration of people, living in close proximity and sharing common grievances, fostered a new kind of collective consciousness. For Nelson, the sheer scale of the city and its inherent inequalities were a revelation. His rural upbringing, while not entirely insulated from the realities of colonial rule, had not prepared him for the overt and systemic nature of urban segregation, and he witnessed firsthand the daily indignities and injustices faced by black Africans, the pass laws, the separate entrances, the lower wages, and the constant threat of forced removals. This environment, while challenging, also provided a fertile ground for the seeds of his political understanding to take deeper root, connecting his personal experiences of injustice to the broader structural oppression of apartheid. The city, in its harshness and its vibrancy, became his new classroom. Upon his arrival in Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela faced the immediate challenge of securing employment, a necessity for survival in the bustling city. His initial attempts were met with the harsh realities of a racially stratified job market. Despite his education, opportunities for black Africans were severely limited, often confined to menial or physically demanding labour. For a period, he found work as a security officer at a gold mine, a position that placed him in direct observation of the arduous and often dangerous conditions faced by black miners, further reinforcing his understanding of economic exploitation under apartheid. This experience, though brief, was a sobering introduction to the core industries that fueled South Africa's economy and the human cost associated with them. It was a stark departure from the academic pursuits of Fort Hare or the gentle pace of rural life. However, his fortune soon shifted through a pivotal connection. It was through his cousin, Justice, that Nelson was introduced to Walter Sisulu, a prominent figure within the African National Congress and a respected real estate agent. Sisulu, recognizing Nelson's intellect and ambition, offered him a clerk position at his law firm, Witkin, Sidelski and Eidelman. This was a significant turning point. The firm, notably, was run by a white liberal lawyer who was sympathetic to the struggles of black Africans, providing an environment where Nelson could begin to apply his legal inclinations. More than just a job, this opportunity placed Nelson directly under the wing of Walter Sisulu. Sisulu quickly became an invaluable mentor, a figure of quiet strength and profound wisdom. He provided not only practical guidance in the legal field, but also a deeper education in the complexities of South African politics and the burgeoning anti-apartheid movement. Sisulu shared his extensive network, introducing Nelson to other activists, thinkers, and community leaders who were dedicated to fighting for justice. Through Sisulu's influence, Nelson gained access to legal texts, political discussions, and a deep understanding of the strategies and philosophies driving the struggle for liberation. Sisulu's calm demeanour and strategic mind offered a powerful counterpoint to Nelson's own youthful fervour, shaping his approach to activism and providing a foundational understanding of organised resistance. This mentorship was instrumental in transforming Nelson's burgeoning political awareness into focused, actionable commitment. The environment of the law firm, and especially the influence of Walter Sisulu, solidified Nelson Mandela's resolve to pursue a career in law. He recognized the profound power of legal knowledge as a tool for challenging injustice and defending the rights of the oppressed. Initially, he enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts degree by correspondence through the University of South Africa, a path often taken by black students who were denied direct access to residential universities. This allowed him to continue working at the law firm during the day while dedicating his evenings and early mornings to his studies. However, the solitary nature of correspondence learning, coupled with the demands of his job and the vibrant political discussions that now filled his free time, proved challenging. He yearned for the intellectual stimulation and direct engagement that a university campus could offer. Consequently, in 1943, Nelson made the significant decision to enroll in a Bachelor of Laws (LLB) degree at the University of Witwatersrand, commonly known as WITS. WITS was a predominantly white institution, but it admitted a small number of black students, offering a rare opportunity for direct academic engagement. This move placed him in a unique and often isolating position, as he was one of only a handful of black students in the law faculty. The contrast between his daily life in the townships and the privileged academic setting was stark. He navigated lecture halls and libraries where he was often an outsider, yet he persevered, driven by a deep sense of purpose. Studying law while simultaneously working full-time as a clerk presented considerable difficulties. His days were filled with the practicalities of legal work, drafting documents, and assisting clients, many of whom were black Africans facing the inequities of the legal system. His evenings were then consumed by the rigorous demands of legal theory, case law, and intricate statutes. Sleep often became a luxury, sacrificed in favour of textbooks and assignments. This period was marked by an intense dedication, a testament to his determination to acquire the legal expertise he believed was essential for the struggle against apartheid. The act of studying itself became a form of quiet resistance, a disciplined pursuit of knowledge in a society that sought to deny it. Johannesburg, the bustling heart of South Africa, was not merely a city of economic opportunity. It was a microcosm of the nation's deeply entrenched racial divisions. For those like Nelson Mandela who arrived seeking a new life, the city immediately presented a landscape of enforced separation. Residential areas were meticulously carved out along racial lines, as were public amenities, transportation, and even the very pathways of daily life. This segregation was not accidental. It was the deliberate outcome of a long history of discriminatory policies that had systematically marginalised the black African majority. The roots of this pervasive discrimination stretched back centuries, interwoven with the arrival of European settlers. Early colonial policies, first under the Dutch and later the British, established a framework where land ownership, political rights, and economic opportunities were increasingly reserved for white inhabitants. Indigenous populations were dispossessed, their traditional structures undermined, and their labour exploited. Laws were progressively introduced to control the movement, residence and employment of black Africans, restricting their access to education and skilled professions. In the early 20th century, following the unification of South Africa, these disparate discriminatory practices began to coalesce into a more formalised system. Legislation like the Native Land Act of 1913, which severely restricted black land ownership, and various past laws which controlled black movement, laid foundational stones for what would become apartheid. The rise of Afrikaner nationalism further intensified this trajectory. Fueled by a distinct cultural identity and a sense of historical grievance, Afrikaner political movements gained momentum, advocating for an even more rigid system of racial separation. They believed in the inherent superiority of the white race and envisioned a future where the various racial groups of South Africa would be kept entirely separate, with white Afrikaners holding ultimate political and economic power. This ideology would soon be translated into the comprehensive and brutal system known as apartheid, but its foundations were already deeply embedded in the segregated streets and discriminatory laws of cities like Johannesburg, long before the official term was coined. The year 1948 marked a profoundly transformative moment in South African history, a turning point that would irrevocably shape the lives of all its inhabitants, especially the black African majority. In that year, a general election brought the National Party, a political entity largely representing Afrikaner interests, to power. Their victory was achieved on a platform explicitly advocating for a new and comprehensive system of racial segregation, which they termed apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning apartness. This election was not merely a change in government, it signalled the formalisation and rigorous enforcement of racial discrimination on an unprecedented scale. Prior discriminatory practices, while harsh, had often been somewhat fragmented or locally applied. The National Party, however, moved swiftly and systematically to codify and expand these policies into a meticulously structured legal framework that permeated every aspect of life. Immediately following their ascent to power, a cascade of new laws was introduced. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act 1949 and the Immorality Act 1950 outlawed romantic relationships and marriages between different racial groups, seeking to prevent any perceived dilution of white racial purity. The Population Registration Act 1950 mandated that every individual be officially classified into one of 4 racial categories: white, black, coloured, mixed race, or Indian. This classification determined one's rights, opportunities, and even where one could live. Perhaps most devastating were the Group Areas Act 1950 and its subsequent amendments, which enforced strict residential segregation, leading to the forced removal of millions of black, coloured, and Indian South Africans from their homes in areas designated for white occupation. Entire communities were uprooted, their homes demolished, and their social fabric torn apart, all in the service of creating racially pure living spaces. The Bantu Education Act 1953 severely limited educational opportunities for black children, designing a curriculum intended to prepare them only for subservient roles in society. These laws, and many others, were not merely theoretical constructs. They were immediately and brutally implemented, dismantling existing social structures, crushing aspirations, and confining black South Africans to a life of profound systemic disadvantage and dehumanization. The formalization of apartheid transformed South Africa into a society built on the bedrock of legalized racial oppression. Under the formal structure of apartheid, daily existence for black South Africans was characterized by an omnipresent and systematic denial of fundamental rights, creating a reality of constant surveillance and indignity. The legal framework established in 1948 did not remain abstract. It manifested in the most intimate details of everyday life, dictating where one could live, work, travel, and even whom one could love. Central to this control were the notorious pass laws. Every black African over the age of 16 was required to carry a pass book at all times. This document contained personal details, employment history, and authorization to be in specific areas. Failure to produce it upon demand by police could lead to immediate arrest, fines, or imprisonment. These laws severely restricted movement, preventing black Africans from entering white urban areas without specific permission, thus controlling the labour supply and enforcing racial separation, as millions were arrested and imprisoned for pass law infringements, making it a constant source of fear and disruption. Segregated facilities were not merely a suggestion, but a legal mandate. Public spaces were explicitly divided by race. Signage declaring whites only or non-whites only was commonplace on park benches, beaches, post offices, public transportation, and even separate entrances to buildings. Hospitals, schools, and even cemeteries were segregated, with facilities for white South Africans consistently superior. This daily visual reinforcement of inferiority was deeply psychologically damaging, instilling a sense of being perpetually lesser. Forced removals, sanctioned by the Group Areas Act, tore apart established communities. Black townships like Sophia Town, District 6 and Cato Manor, and vibrant centres of culture and life were systematically razed, and their inhabitants forcibly relocated to distant, underdeveloped areas, often with inadequate infrastructure or services. These removals were executed with cold efficiency, severing social ties, destroying livelihoods and erasing a sense of belonging that had often spanned generations. The denial of political rights was absolute. Black South Africans had no representation in the national parliament, no vote in national elections, and no effective voice in the laws that govern their lives. Trade union rights were severely curtailed, and protest was met with brutal force. This pervasive system of discrimination touched every aspect of life, from birth to death, ensuring that racial hierarchy was not only maintained but relentlessly enforced through the legal and coercive power of the state. Witnessing the daily indignities and systemic oppression of apartheid, Nelson Mandela found his political home in 1944 when he formally joined the African National Congress, or ANC. At this time, the ANC was an organisation with a long and respected history, founded in 1912 with the aim of uniting African people and achieving equal rights. However, its methods were largely characterised by petitions, deputations and appeals to the British Crown and the South African government, reflecting a more cautious and constitutional approach. Mandela, still in his mid-20s, along with other young, educated and increasingly frustrated Africans, felt a growing impatience with the ANC's traditional strategies. They believed that the escalating severity of racial discrimination, particularly with the looming threat and eventual implementation of apartheid, demanded a more vigorous and direct form of resistance. This sentiment coalesced into the formation of the ANC Youth League in 1944. Key figures alongside Mandela in this new movement included Anton Lembede, its first president, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo. These young leaders shared a conviction that the time for polite requests and appeals to conscience was over. They advocated for a shift from a reliance on moral persuasion to a program of direct action. The Youth League's approach was notably more militant and assertive than that of the older generation within the ANC. Their philosophy emphasized self-reliance and African nationalism, urging black South Africans to take ownership of their struggle for liberation. They proposed strategies such as boycotts, strikes, and civil disobedience, believing that only through sustained non-violent direct action could the government be compelled to dismantle its discriminatory policies. This marked a significant ideological evolution within the broader liberation movement. The Youth League sought to revitalise the parent body, infusing it with renewed energy and a more confrontational spirit. They argued that the ANC needed to become a mass movement, mobilising ordinary people in active resistance, rather than relying solely on the efforts of a small educated elite. This assertive stance would soon begin to reshape the trajectory of the African National Congress and the anti-apartheid struggle itself. Within the vibrant and intellectually charged atmosphere of the newly formed ANC Youth League, a powerful philosophy began to take root, profoundly influencing its members, including Nelson Mandela. This was the ideology of Africanism, largely articulated and championed by Anton Lembede, the League's inspirational first president. Lembede was a profound thinker, whose ideas provided a robust intellectual framework for the Youth League's more militant stance. Lembede's Africanism was a philosophy rooted in the belief that Africa was for Africans. It emphasized racial pride, self-assertion, and the complete liberation of the continent from all forms of colonial and racial domination. He argued that African people possessed their own unique spiritual, cultural, and political identity, and that their destiny lay in their own hands. Yet not in the benevolence of colonial powers or the goodwill of white liberals. He fiercely rejected any notion of racial inferiority and called for a psychological liberation alongside political freedom. Lembede believed that Africans should not seek integration into the existing discriminatory system, but rather strive to establish a truly democratic and non-racial society where their dignity and rights were fully recognized. His vision was one of a united, independent Africa, free from foreign control and exploitation. These ideas resonated deeply with Mandela and his peers. Lembede's eloquent arguments for self-determination and his unwavering commitment to the African cause provided a powerful antidote to the pervasive sense of powerlessness that apartheid sought to instill. Mandela, who had grown up with a deep respect for traditional leadership and community, found in Africanism a modern articulation of self-worth and collective agency. Lembede's influence helped to sharpen Mandela's understanding of the historical roots of oppression and the psychological dimensions of colonialism. It instilled in him a conviction that the struggle for freedom was fundamentally an African struggle, to be led by Africans themselves. While Mandela's political thought would evolve over time, incorporating broader non-racial ideals, the foundational principles of self-determination and pride, articulated so forcefully by Lembede, remained a core element of his early political identity and guided his initial activism within the Youth League. The intellectual ferment and rising impatience within the ANC Youth League culminated in a pivotal moment for the broader African National Congress. In 1949, largely under the persistent influence and advocacy of the Youth League, the ANC formally adopted a radical new strategy known as the Programme of Action. This marked a significant departure from the organisation's traditionally cautious and petition-based approach, signalling a new era of direct confrontation with the apartheid regime. The Programme of Action was a bold and comprehensive blueprint for resistance. It rejected the old methods of deputations and appeals to the government, recognising their futility in the face of escalating repression. Instead, it called for a sustained and widespread campaign of mass action designed to render apartheid unworkable and to pressure the government into dismantling its discriminatory laws. At its core, the Programme of Action advocated for a series of non-violent yet disruptive tactics. These included nationwide boycotts of segregated institutions and services, organised strikes to paralyse key industries, and acts of civil disobedience against unjust laws. The objective was to mobilise the broad masses of the African population, demonstrating their collective power and resolve to resist oppression. The Youth League, with figures like Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Oliver Tambo at the forefront, had tirelessly campaigned for this shift. They believed that only through direct, visible, and disruptive action could the ANC effectively challenge the might of the apartheid state. The adoption of the Programme of Action was a testament to their growing influence and the increasing frustration felt by many within the ANC with the slow pace of change. This new strategy was not merely a tactical adjustment, it represented a fundamental shift in the ANC's identity and its method of struggle. It moved the organisation from a relatively elite, petitioning body to one committed to mass mobilisation and direct confrontation. For Nelson Mandela, the Programme of Action provided a concrete framework for the militant activism he had long advocated. It was a commitment to practical resistance, a call to translate the principles of Africanism into tangible, impactful deeds, setting the stage for the intense struggles that lay ahead. Building upon the foundation of the Programme of Action, 1952 saw the launch of the Defiance Campaign, a landmark non-violent resistance movement that profoundly shaped the trajectory of the anti-apartheid struggle. This initiative, jointly organised by the African National Congress and the South African Indian Congress, was a direct implementation of the mass action strategies envisioned by the Youth League. Nelson Mandela was appointed as the National Volunteer-in-Chief for the campaign, a role that placed him at the heart of its organisation and execution. His task was immense: to coordinate thousands of volunteers across the country, instruct them in the principles of non-violent resistance, and prepare them for deliberate acts of civil disobedience. The campaign specifically targeted 6 unjust apartheid laws, including the Pass Laws and the Group Areas Act. On June 26, 1952, the campaign officially began. Across South Africa, volunteers intentionally broke apartheid laws, often by entering whites-only facilities, defying curfews or burning their passbooks. They did so openly and peacefully, inviting arrest. The response from the apartheid government was swift and severe. Mass arrests became commonplace, with over 8,000 people incarcerated during the campaign's 6-month duration. Mandela himself was among those arrested, facing charges for his leadership role. Despite the widespread arrests and the government's harsh reaction, the Defiance campaign achieved significant outcomes. It dramatically increased both national and international awareness of the brutal realities of apartheid. For the first time, the world witnessed the organised, non-violent resistance of black South Africans on a large scale. Within South Africa, the campaign invigorated the ANC, leading to a surge in membership as ordinary citizens, inspired by the courage of the volunteers, joined the movement. It forged a sense of unity and collective purpose among disparate communities, laying crucial groundwork for future struggles against racial segregation and injustice. Amidst the growing intensity of the Defiance campaign in 1952, a different kind of resistance was taking shape, one rooted in the quiet strength of legal advocacy. It was in this pivotal year that Nelson Mandela, alongside his trusted colleague Oliver Tambo, established Mandela & Tambo, a law firm that would become a profound symbol of hope and a practical refuge for countless victims of apartheid. This was not merely the opening of another legal practice, it was the creation of the first black-run law firm in South Africa. In a society meticulously stratified by race, where opportunities for black professionals were virtually non-existent, the very existence of Mandela & Tambo was an act of defiance in itself. It stood as a testament to the capabilities and determination of black South Africans, challenging the deeply ingrained prejudices of the era. Their offices, initially situated in a modest building in downtown Johannesburg, quickly became a bustling hub. The firm was dedicated to providing legal services to the black community, a population systematically dispossessed and disempowered by apartheid laws. People from all walks of life facing a myriad of injustices flocked to Mandela & Tambo. They sought assistance with pass law violations, forced removals, discriminatory labour practices, and countless other legal battles born from racial oppression. Mandela & Tambo understood that the law, while often used as a tool of oppression, could also be wielded as a weapon for justice. They offered a crucial lifeline to those who had nowhere else to turn, navigating the complex and often hostile legal landscape on behalf of their clients. The firm became far more than just a place for legal counsel. It was a beacon of hope, a place where black South Africans could find not only legal representation, but also empathy, understanding, and a sense of dignity in the face of systemic dehumanization. Their work provided a tangible form of resistance, challenging the state's authority not only through mass action, but also through the meticulous application of legal principles. In June of 1955, a momentous assembly took place in a dusty field in Kliptown, a township south of Johannesburg. This gathering, known as the Congress of the People, represented an unprecedented effort to articulate a collective vision for a future South Africa, free from the shackles of apartheid. Thousands of delegates, representing diverse racial and social groups from across the country, converged with a shared purpose: to draft a document that would enshrine the aspirations of all South Africans. The idea for the Congress had emerged from the African National Congress and its allies in the Congress Alliance, following the widespread participation in the Defiance campaign. It was a democratic exercise on an immense scale preceding the actual event. Over many months, volunteers fanned out into communities, collecting demands or freedoms from ordinary people, workers, peasants, teachers, students, and professionals about the kind of South Africa they wished to inhabit. These countless submissions were then collated and synthesized into a foundational document. The result of this meticulous process was the Freedom Charter. This remarkable declaration, adopted at Cliptown, laid out a comprehensive blueprint for a non-racial, democratic, and just South Africa. Its opening statement, "South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white," immediately challenged the very premise of apartheid. The Charter proclaimed that all people were equal before the law, that the land should be shared, just that all should have equal access to education and work, and that there should be peace and friendship among all peoples. The Freedom Charter became the guiding document for the anti-apartheid movement, a powerful articulation of a shared dream. Its principles, advocating for fundamental human rights, economic equality, and a democratic government, resonated deeply with millions. Despite immediate condemnation from the apartheid government, which viewed it as treasonous, the Charter's vision continued to inspire and unify the struggle for decades. Its legacy endures, its ideals profoundly influencing the democratic constitution adopted in South Africa many years later, long after the dismantling of apartheid. The government's response to the growing unity and clear vision articulated by the Freedom Charter was swift and severe, and in the pre-dawn hours of December 5th, 1956, a wave of arrests swept across South Africa. Police descended on homes in every major city, apprehending activists, trade unionists and intellectuals. Nelson Mandela was among those taken, his work as a lawyer and his leadership in the African National Congress having made him a prominent target. In total, 156 individuals were arrested, encompassing a broad spectrum of the anti-apartheid movement. Men and women, black, white, Indian, and coloured. They were all charged with high treason, an offence carrying the most severe penalties, including death. The state alleged that their activities, particularly their involvement in the Congress Alliance and the drafting of the Freedom Charter, constituted a communist conspiracy to overthrow the government by violence. This was a direct attempt to cripple the burgeoning resistance and to intimidate its leadership into silence. The accused were initially held at various prisons, enduring harsh conditions before being brought to court. The preliminary hearing began in December 1956 in Johannesburg, held in a drill hall that quickly became a focal point of international attention. The sheer number of defendants and the gravity of the charges immediately indicated that this would not be a brief legal proceeding. The prosecution's case was meticulously constructed, relying heavily on documents, speeches and statements made by the accused, particularly the Freedom Charter itself, which the state presented as evidence of a revolutionary plot. The atmosphere in the courtroom was often tense, yet beneath the legalistic arguments, a powerful human drama unfolded. The trial quickly became a prolonged and arduous ordeal stretching over many years. It demanded immense resilience from the accused, who faced the constant threat of conviction and severe punishment. For Mandela and his fellow defendants, the treason trial was not merely a legal battle, it was a profound test of their convictions and their unwavering commitment to a free and democratic South Africa. It marked the beginning of a long period of legal and personal struggle, altering the trajectory of their lives and the course of the anti-apartheid movement. The treason trial became a crucible, forging bonds among the accused that would endure for decades. Despite the oppressive atmosphere of the courtroom and the constant threat to their freedom, a remarkable spirit of camaraderie developed. Inside the confines of the court, and during the periods of their detention, the 156 defendants, representing diverse backgrounds and political affiliations, found common ground. They shared meals, discussed strategies, and offered each other support, transforming a space of legal adversity into one of intellectual exchange and mutual encouragement. Nelson Mandela, already a respected leader, continued to play a significant role in fostering this unity. His legal background proved invaluable, as he helped to analyse the prosecution's arguments and to coordinate the defense. The legal team, comprising both black and white lawyers, worked tirelessly to challenge the state's narrative. Their strategy revolved around demonstrating that the Freedom Charter was a legitimate and peaceful aspiration for a democratic society, was not a blueprint for violent revolution. They meticulously cross-examined witnesses and presented arguments that exposed the political motivations behind the trial, rather than any genuine legal wrongdoing. The sheer length of the trial, stretching from 1956 to 1961, presented immense personal challenges. Many of the accused were breadwinners, and their prolonged absence from work or their professions placed severe strain on their families. Mandela himself experienced significant personal upheaval, separated from his young family and unable to practice law effectively. Yet, through these difficulties, the resolve of the accused remained firm. As the trial unfolded, its significance resonated far beyond the borders of South Africa. International observers, journalists, and human rights organizations followed the proceedings closely. The image of 156 activists standing united against the might of the apartheid state captured global attention. This growing international scrutiny began to expose the injustices of apartheid to a wider audience, laying the groundwork for future global solidarity movements. The treason trial, therefore, served not only as a legal battleground, but also as a powerful platform for the anti-apartheid cause, amplifying its message to the world. In the midst of the treason trial, a pivotal and tragic event unfolded that irrevocably altered the course of the anti-apartheid struggle. On March 21, 1960, a peaceful protest against the restrictive pass laws took place in Sharpeville, a township near Vereeniging. Thousands of unarmed black South Africans gathered, intending to offer themselves for arrest, thereby overwhelming the prison system and highlighting the injustice of the pass laws. The atmosphere was initially calm, but then, without clear provocation, police opened fire on the assembled crowd. The shots rang out for approximately 2 minutes, leaving 69 people dead and more than 180 wounded. Many of the victims were shot in the back as they attempted to flee. The images and reports of the massacre sent shockwaves across South Africa and around the world, exposing the brutal face of apartheid to an unprecedented degree. The Sharpeville massacre represented a profound turning point. The government's response was swift and severe. Just days after the tragedy, a state of emergency was declared, granting authorities sweeping powers of arrest and detention. Following this, both the African National Congress, ANC, and the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, the two leading liberation movements, were banned under the Unlawful Organizations Act. This act effectively outlawed their activities, forcing them underground and criminalizing their members. For Nelson Mandela and his comrades, who were still engaged in the treason trial, the massacre and subsequent bannings were deeply sobering. It demonstrated the government's unwavering commitment to suppress dissent through extreme violence and its refusal to engage with peaceful protest. The event solidified a growing conviction within the liberation movement that non-violent means alone might no longer be sufficient to dismantle apartheid. The paths ahead for the ANC and PAC would now necessarily involve new, more radical strategies in response to the state's escalating repression. The Sharpeville massacre thus marked the end of an era of predominantly peaceful resistance and the dawning of a new, more confrontational phase in the struggle for liberation. The aftermath of Sharpeville and the subsequent banning of the ANC and PAC presented the anti-apartheid leadership with a profound and agonizing dilemma. For decades, the African National Congress had steadfastly adhered to a policy of non-violent resistance, inspired by figures such as Mahatma Gandhi. This commitment to peaceful protest had been a cornerstone of their strategy, even in the face of escalating repression and violence from the state. However, the events of 1960 shattered any lingering illusions that the apartheid government would ever yield to peaceful demands. The state had demonstrated its willingness to use lethal force against unarmed civilians and had effectively criminalized all forms of organized non-violent political opposition. It became clear to many within the leadership, including Nelson Mandela, that the avenues for peaceful protest had been systematically closed off. After extensive and often difficult deliberation, a momentous decision was reached. It was concluded that to continue the struggle for liberation, the movement would have to adopt new tactics. The ANC leadership, while not abandoning political action, recognised the necessity of complementing it with a more forceful approach. This led to the formation of an armed wing, known as Umkhonto we Sizwe, which translates to Spear of the Nation. Nelson Mandela was a key figure in this decision and became its first commander-in-chief. He understood the gravity of this shift, which moved the movement into uncharted and perilous territory. The mandate of Umkhonto we Sizwe was not to engage in terrorism or target civilians, but rather to conduct acts of sabotage against government installations, symbols of apartheid, and economic infrastructure. The aim was to pressure the regime, disrupt its operations, and instill a sense of vulnerability without causing loss of life. This turn to armed struggle was not undertaken lightly. It was a desperate measure, born out of the conviction that all other peaceful options had been exhausted. It marked a radical departure from the ANC's historical principles, but was seen as a necessary evolution in the face of an increasingly brutal and intransigent regime. The formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe signalled a new, more dangerous chapter in the fight for a democratic South Africa. With the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe and the government's relentless pursuit of its opponents, Nelson Mandela's life underwent a profound transformation. He could no longer operate openly. The state's surveillance was intense, and the risk of immediate arrest was constant. To lead the nascent armed struggle, he made the difficult decision to disappear from public view, embracing an underground existence. This new phase required an extraordinary level of secrecy and discipline. Mandela became a phantom, moving through South Africa unseen by the authorities who desperately sought him. He adopted various disguises, altering his appearance to blend into different communities. Sometimes he would pose as a chauffeur, driving a car for a white family, his demeanour calm and unremarkable. At other times he might appear as a gardener, tending to lawns in suburban areas, his hands accustomed to manual labour from his youth. His ability to evade capture earned him the moniker the Black Pimpernel, a reference to the elusive hero of literature who outwitted his pursuers. He travelled extensively across the country, often under the cloak of darkness or using elaborate ruses. One notable disguise involved him posing as a cook, complete with a chef's hat and apron, moving unnoticed through bustling kitchens. These operations demanded meticulous planning and the unwavering loyalty of a network of supporters who risked their own freedom to protect him. Mandela's underground activities were not merely about evasion. They were central to organising the armed struggle. He travelled to various locations, meeting with small cells of Umkhonto we Sizwe operatives, providing guidance and bolstering morale. He established safe houses and intricate communication channels, ensuring that directives could be passed on and information gathered without detection. His presence, though hidden, was a powerful symbol of resistance, inspiring those who knew of his clandestine work. This period was one of immense personal sacrifice. He was separated from his family, living a life of constant vigilance and solitude. Every interaction, every journey, carried the weight of potential discovery. Yet he embraced this dangerous existence with a quiet determination, believing it was essential for the future of the movement. His time underground forged him into an even more resilient and resourceful leader, capable of operating effectively in the shadows while still directing the struggle towards the light. The decision to abandon decades of non-violent resistance was not made lightly. It was a profound and sombre turning point for the African National Congress and its leadership. Faced with an increasingly brutal and uncompromising apartheid regime, and with all avenues for peaceful protest systematically closed, a new strategy was deemed necessary. Thus, in December 1961, Umkhonto weSizwe, or Spear of the Nation, abbreviated as MK, was formally established. This new armed wing of the ANC was conceived as a last resort, a response to the escalating state violence and the clear signal that the government would crush any form of dissent. Nelson Mandela, a key architect of this shift, was instrumental in its formation, recognizing that the struggle had entered a new, more dangerous phase. The creation of MK marked a profound departure from the principles that had guided the movement for half a century. Crucially, MK's initial strategy was carefully defined and deliberately limited. Its primary objective was sabotage. The targets were to be government installations, infrastructure that symbolized the apparatus of apartheid, and economic assets that sustained the regime. This included power stations, railway lines, post offices, and other non-human targets. The intention was to inflict damage upon the state's capacity to oppress, to disrupt its functioning, and to demonstrate the growing resolve of the liberation movement. From its inception, MK explicitly avoided actions that would result in the loss of human life. This ethical constraint was a foundational principle, reflecting the ANC's long-standing commitment to human dignity and its desire to pressure the regime without resorting to indiscriminate violence. The aim was to force the government to the negotiating table, to make the cost of maintaining apartheid too high, rather than to engage in a conventional armed conflict. The very first acts of sabotage were carried out on December 16, 1961, coincidentally a significant date in Afrikaner history. These initial operations, though modest in scale, sent a clear message. They marked the opening of a new front in the anti-apartheid struggle, one where the roar of explosives replaced the chants of peaceful protest, yet still guided by a strategic restraint and a deep-seated desire for a just and peaceful future. The formation of MK represented a reluctant but resolute step into a more confrontational era, born out of necessity and a continued hope for liberation. Following the strategic decision to form Umkhonto weSizwe, it became clear that external support would be vital for its effectiveness. The nascent armed wing required training, resources, and international recognition to sustain its efforts against a well-equipped state. This necessity prompted Nelson Mandela to undertake a clandestine journey across the African continent in 1962. It was a perilous undertaking, and given his status as a wanted man within South Africa. Operating under various disguises and aliases, Mandela embarked on what would become known as his Pan-African tour. His primary objective was twofold: to secure assistance for military training for MK cadres and to garner political and financial support for the anti-apartheid movement from independent African nations. This journey was a testament to his dedication and the urgency of the situation. His travels took him to numerous countries, where he met with heads of state, liberation movement leaders, and influential figures. In Ethiopia, he received a warm welcome and began to lay the groundwork for future training opportunities. He visited Algeria, then in the throes of its own independence struggle, drawing inspiration and insights from their fight. In Ghana, he met with President Kwame Nkrumah, a prominent advocate for Pan-Africanism, who offered expressions of solidarity and practical assistance. Mandela's itinerary also included visits to Tunisia, Morocco, and Egypt, among others. Each stop served to strengthen connections, explain the evolving situation in South Africa, and appeal for tangible aid. These meetings were not merely ceremonial, they were crucial diplomatic efforts to build a network of support that would be essential for the long and difficult struggle ahead. He also attended the Pan-African Freedom Movement for Eastern Central Africa, PAFMECA, conference in Addis Ababa, where he delivered a powerful address articulating the plight of black South Africans and the ANC's commitment to liberation. Through these engagements, Mandela's international profile began to grow significantly. He was no longer just a leader within South Africa. He was emerging as a voice for the oppressed, a symbol of resistance against racial injustice on a global stage. The tour demonstrated his remarkable ability to connect with diverse leaders and articulate the universal principles of freedom and equality. It laid crucial foundations for future international solidarity, ensuring that the struggle against apartheid would not remain isolated within the borders of South Africa. Upon his return to South Africa in July 1962, Nelson Mandela continued his clandestine work, moving from safe house to safe house, maintaining his disguise as a chauffeur. The Pan-African tour had been successful in many respects, but the immediate challenge remained the ongoing organisation of Umkhonto we Sizwe and the internal resistance. The security police, however, were relentlessly pursuing him, having dedicated significant resources to his capture. The authorities had been monitoring his movements with increasing intensity, utilising informants and sophisticated surveillance techniques. On August 5th, 1962, Mandela was travelling by car from Durban to Johannesburg, accompanied by Cecil Williams, a white theatre director and fellow activist. As they drove along the R103 road near Howick in KwaZulu-Natal, their vehicle was intercepted by police. A roadblock had been carefully planned, and the moment of his apprehension arrived swiftly. The capture brought an end to his 17 months as the Black Pimpernel. The news quickly spread, confirming what the apartheid regime had long desired. Mandela was taken into custody, marking a profound shift in his life and the trajectory of the anti-apartheid movement. His period of underground leadership had concluded, but a new phase of his struggle, one conducted from behind prison walls, was about to begin. Mandela was initially charged with inciting workers to strike and leaving the country without permission. The trial commenced in October 1962. He chose to represent himself, transforming the courtroom into a platform to articulate his political beliefs and condemn the injustice of the apartheid system. His demeanour was defiant yet composed, using the legal proceedings to expose the illegitimacy of the laws he was accused of breaking. In November 1962, the court delivered its verdict, and Nelson Mandela was found guilty on both counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This initial conviction, while significant, was merely the precursor to a much longer and more arduous period of incarceration. It marked his formal entry into the South African penal system, a system designed to crush the spirit of those who dared to challenge the state. His freedom had been taken, but his resolve remained unbroken. While Nelson Mandela served his initial 5-year sentence, events unfolded that would dramatically alter his fate. In July 1963, a police raid on Liliesleaf Farm in Rivonia, a clandestine hideout near Johannesburg, uncovered a treasure trove of documents belonging to Umkhonto we Sizwe. These papers detailed plans for sabotage and a potential armed uprising, along with a list of targets and evidence of foreign support. Several key leaders of the movement were arrested during this raid. Mandela, already imprisoned, was implicated by the recovered documents. The state quickly moved to consolidate its case, linking him directly to the leadership of Umkhonto we Sizwe and its alleged revolutionary aims. The charges brought against Mandela and his co-accused were of the gravest nature: sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government by violence. These were capital offences under South African law, carrying the very real possibility of the death penalty. The trial, which began in October 1963, became known as the Rivonia Trial. It drew international attention, exposing the harsh realities of apartheid to a global audience. For the state, it was an opportunity to dismantle the leadership of the liberation movement and send a clear message to any who dared to challenge its authority. For the accused, it was a fight for their lives and a chance to articulate the moral imperative of their struggle. Mandela, along with fellow defendants like Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and Ahmed Kathrada, faced the full might of the apartheid legal system. The prosecution presented a vast amount of evidence, meticulously detailing the activities of Umkhonto we Sizwe. The courtroom was a tense environment, with the defendants fully aware of the dire consequences that awaited them if convicted. The spectre of execution loomed large over the proceedings, casting a sombre shadow over every testimony and legal argument. The trial was not merely a legal battle, and it was a political confrontation played out in the public sphere. The defendants, despite the severe risks, used the platform to explain their motivations and the systemic injustices that had driven them to embrace armed resistance. The gravity of the charges underscored the regime's determination to crush all forms of opposition, and the world watched, holding its breath, as the fate of these prominent anti-apartheid leaders hung in the balance. As the Rivonia trial neared its conclusion, Nelson Mandela chose to deliver a statement from the dock, rather than testify under cross-examination. This decision transformed his defence into a powerful political declaration, carefully crafted and delivered over several hours on April 20, 1964. The speech became an enduring testament to his convictions and a rallying cry for justice. He began by acknowledging his role in the formation of Umkhonto we Sizwe, detailing the long and arduous journey through non-violent resistance that had ultimately led to the decision to pursue sabotage. He explained that this shift was not born of recklessness, but from a profound understanding that all peaceful avenues for change had been systematically blocked by the apartheid state. He spoke of the ANC's commitment to a multiracial democratic South Africa, where all people, regardless of their colour, would live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. The core of his address, however, lay in its unwavering affirmation of principle. Mandela articulated his vision for a society where racial discrimination would be abolished, where wealth would be distributed more equitably, and where human dignity would be respected. He characterized these ideals not as radical, but as fundamental aspirations for any just society. His words built towards a profound and unforgettable conclusion. With quiet resolve, he stated that he had dedicated his life to the struggle of the African people. He spoke of having fought against white domination and having fought against black domination, advocating instead for a democratic and free society in which all persons would live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. Then, in a moment that echoed through history, he uttered the lines that would forever define his commitment. "It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." This declaration, delivered in the shadow of a potential death sentence, resonated deeply. It was not a plea for mercy, but a defiant affirmation of his beliefs, signalling an absolute dedication to the cause of liberation, even at the cost of his own life. The speech cemented his image as an unyielding leader and transformed the trial into a global stage for the anti-apartheid movement, inspiring countless individuals and movements around the world. Its impact was immediate and long-lasting, turning a moment of extreme peril into a beacon of moral clarity and courageous resolve. Following the conclusion of the Rivonia trial and the pronouncement of life sentences for Nelson Mandela and his co-accused, they were transported to Robben Island. This barren outcrop, located a few kilometres off the coast of Cape Town, had long served as a place of exile and incarceration, its history stretching back centuries to the Dutch colonial era. Like for the political prisoners, it represented the ultimate expression of the apartheid regime's intent to isolate and silence its most prominent opponents. The journey to the island was often stark, a symbolic crossing from the mainland, from the world of human rights and political struggle, into a realm designed for deprivation. Upon arrival, the prisoners were immediately confronted with the harsh realities of their new environment. Robben Island was not merely a prison, it was a carefully constructed instrument of dehumanization. The air was often cold and windswept, carrying the scent of the sea, yet offering no comfort. The initial conditions were deliberately brutal. The political prisoners, particularly those designated as Category D, the lowest classification, faced the most severe treatment. They were housed in small, austere cells, each containing only a thin mat for sleeping and a bucket for sanitation. The daily routine was rigid and unforgiving, designed to break the spirit and enforce absolute compliance. Work details involved hard labour in the island's lime quarry, a physically demanding and monotonous task carried out under the watchful eyes of warders. The glaring white dust from the quarry, reflecting the sun, would later cause severe eye damage to many prisoners, including Mandela. Food rations were meagre and of poor quality, barely sufficient to sustain the demanding physical labour. Communication with the outside world was severely restricted, with letters heavily censored and visits rare and brief, intended more as a reminder of their isolation than a genuine connection. The warders, often young and drawn from rural Afrikaner communities, enforced regulations with a strictness that often bordered on cruelty, frequently employing racial slurs and physical abuse. This deliberate policy aimed to strip the prisoners of their dignity and their political identity, reducing them to mere numbers within the prison system. Robben Island was intended to be a place where hope withered and resistance was extinguished. A central feature of the early years on Robben Island, and a deliberate instrument of the prison's punitive philosophy, was the lime quarry. Each day, the political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela, were marched to this open pit. Their task was to break rocks, to extract lime, a physically arduous and relentless labour under the harsh South African sun. The tools were basic: picks, shovels and wheelbarrows. The work was monotonous, demanding repetitive motions that strained muscles and dulled the senses. The physical toll of this daily grind was immense. The men, many of whom had previously been lawyers, teachers or activists, were unaccustomed to such sustained manual labour. Their bodies, already weakened by inadequate nutrition, struggled to adapt. Blisters formed, hands hardened, and backs ached. Yet they were compelled to continue day after day, week after week, month after month. One of the most insidious aspects of the quarry work was the blinding glare. The raw lime, reflecting the intense sunlight, created a pervasive, almost painful brightness. The prison authorities deliberately withheld sunglasses, despite the obvious and stated concerns of the prisoners regarding their vision. This constant exposure to the unshielded light led to significant and lasting damage to the prisoners' eyes, including impaired vision and chronic discomfort. It was a calculated cruelty, designed not only to inflict physical suffering, but also to diminish their capacity to read or study, further isolating them intellectually. Beyond the physical hardship, the quarry served as a stage for the deliberate dehumanization tactics employed by the guards. They would often stand over the prisoners, shouting orders, making derogatory comments, and enforcing strict silence. Any perceived infraction, however minor, could result in punishment, ranging from reduced rations to physical beatings. The aim was to crush their spirit, to remind them constantly of their subjugation. and to strip away any remaining sense of individual worth or political conviction. However, even within this brutal environment, moments of quiet defiance and solidarity began to emerge. The shared hardship, the common enemy, and the unwavering commitment to their cause forged bonds among the prisoners that the guards could not break. The quarry, intended as a symbol of their defeat, inadvertently became a crucible, where their resolve was tested and in many cases strengthened. Beyond the communal hardship of the quarry, a more profound and insidious form of punishment awaited those deemed especially defiant or dangerous: solitary confinement. This was a deliberate and calculated strategy to isolate prisoners completely, severing all contact with the outside world and even with their fellow inmates. For Nelson Mandela, where periods of solitary confinement were not uncommon, especially during the earlier years on Robben Island when the prison regime was at its most severe. In solitary, this cell became a world unto itself, a small enclosed space where the only constant companion was the prisoner's own thoughts. The dimensions were minimal, often just enough room for a thin mat on the floor and a bucket for waste. The light, if present, was often dim and filtered, further blurring the lines between day and night. The silence could be deafening, broken only by the distant sounds of the prison or the rhythmic thud of one's own heartbeat. Severe restrictions were placed on all forms of communication. Letters to and from family were heavily censored, often delayed for months, or simply withheld. Visits were rare, brief, and conducted through a thick glass partition, with guards listening intently to every word. Any attempt to pass messages covertly was met with severe penalties. The authorities understood that communication was a lifeline, a connection to humanity and hope, and they sought to sever it as completely as possible. Access to reading materials was similarly restricted. Books, newspapers, and even legal documents were often denied or severely limited. The rationale was clear: to prevent the spread of ideas, to hinder political education, and to deny the prisoners intellectual stimulation. For a man like Mandela, who valued knowledge and discourse, this deprivation was particularly acute, forcing him to rely on his memory and internal reflections for mental exercise. Personal belongings were almost non-existent. A meagre uniform, a blanket, and basic hygiene items were typically all that was permitted. Photographs of loved ones, small personal mementos, anything that could provide comfort or a sense of identity, were strictly forbidden. This stripping away of personal effects was another deliberate tactic of dehumanization, aimed at eroding the prisoner's sense of self and their connection to their past life. The psychological challenges of this intense isolation were profound. The absence of human interaction, the monotony, and the constant surveillance could lead to feelings of despair, anxiety, and a profound sense of loneliness. Maintaining mental fortitude in such conditions required immense inner strength, a steadfast purpose, and the ability to find meaning and structure within the confines of one's own mind. It was a test of resilience that few could endure without profound internal struggle. Despite the calculated brutality of Robben Island, the prisoners, including Nelson Mandela, forged a powerful collective resistance. This was not always overt rebellion, but a steadfast refusal to be broken, a quiet determination to maintain their dignity and purpose. They transformed the prison from a place of isolation into a crucible of learning and political organizing. A sophisticated system of internal communication was developed, often through ingenious and risky methods. Messages were whispered during work details, passed in clandestine notes, or even conveyed through a complex network of gestures and coded language during brief supervised interactions. This underground network ensured that information about the outside world, political developments, and even news from other prison sections could circulate, fostering a sense of shared experience and purpose. education became a cornerstone of their resilience. Denied formal schooling, the prisoners established their own informal universities. Those with legal, historical, or political knowledge became teachers, holding classes in their cells, in the courtyard during exercise time, or even in the quarry, speaking in hushed tones while appearing to be engaged in labour. Mandela, with his legal background, often taught constitutional law and history. These lessons were not merely academic, they reinforced their understanding of the struggle and prepared them for the future. Maintaining morale was paramount. Humour, storytelling, and shared experiences became vital tools against despair. They celebrated small victories, supported those struggling with the psychological toll of imprisonment, and continuously reminded each other of the righteousness of their cause. Songs of freedom and resistance were sung softly, a quiet defiance that echoed through the prison walls. They also organised against the inhumane conditions. Petitions were drafted, grievances were formally submitted, and hunger strikes were occasionally initiated to protest specific abuses or to demand better treatment. While often met with swift and brutal retaliation, these acts of collective protest demonstrated their unbroken spirit and their refusal to accept their status as mere criminals. This collective resilience transformed Robben Island into a symbol, not just of apartheid's cruelty, but of the indomitable human spirit in the face of tyranny. Within the confines of Robben Island, a remarkable transformation occurred, leading to its unofficial designation as the University of Robben Island. Denied access to formal education, the political prisoners collectively turned their incarceration into an opportunity for profound self-improvement and intellectual growth. This was a conscious act of defiance against a system designed to diminish their minds as well as their bodies. The faculty comprised the prisoners themselves, a diverse group of intellectuals, activists, and leaders from various political organizations, each bringing unique knowledge and perspectives. Classes were held surreptitiously, often in the evenings after the guards had conducted their final rounds, or during the brief periods of outdoor exercise. These makeshift classrooms ranged from a quiet corner of a cell to a discreet spot in the prison yard. Nelson Mandela was both a prominent mentor and an eager student in this extraordinary institution. Drawing upon his legal expertise and extensive political experience, he regularly taught subjects such as law, history, and political theory. He guided discussions on the future of South Africa, the principles of non-racialism, and strategies for a post-apartheid society. His calm demeanour and methodical approach made him a respected educator. Yet Mandela also embraced the role of a student. He recognised the value of learning from his fellow inmates, many of whom possessed deep knowledge in areas outside his own specialisation. He diligently studied economics from some, philosophy from others, and even learned new languages, including Afrikaans, believing it crucial to understand the language of his oppressors in order to communicate with them effectively. This commitment to continuous learning reflected his belief that intellectual preparedness was as vital as political activism. The debates and discussions within the university were rigorous and wide-ranging. They analysed global political movements, critiqued different ideologies, and refined their vision for a democratic South Africa. These intellectual exercises not only kept their minds sharp, but also solidified their ideological unity and prepared them for the complex challenges of governance that lay ahead, forging a powerful intellectual legacy that transcended the prison walls. Amidst the harsh isolation of Robben Island, the prospect of family visits offered a fleeting, yet often agonizing, connection to the outside world. These visits were infrequent, typically permitted only once every 6 months, and were subject to stringent restrictions designed to minimize meaningful interaction and prevent any unauthorized communication. For Mandela and his fellow prisoners, these moments were both a source of deep yearning and profound emotional strain. The visitations took place in a sterile room, separated by a thick pane of glass or a wire mesh, ensuring no physical contact was possible. Conversations were conducted through a telephone receiver, often monitored by a prison guard, further inhibiting any natural flow of dialogue. The allocated time was brief, usually 30 minutes, a period barely sufficient to bridge the chasm of months of separation. Every word was weighed, every glance scrutinized, creating an environment of profound discomfort rather than genuine intimacy. For Mandela, these visits were particularly poignant. He watched his children grow older, their faces changing, their voices maturing, through the distorting lens of the prison system. The inability to offer comfort, to share a touch, or to fully participate in their lives was a constant source of quiet sorrow. He struggled to convey fatherly affection and guidance within the cold, monitored environment. The emotional toll on his family, especially Winnie Mandela, was immense. She bore the primary responsibility of raising their children, enduring her own persecution and banning orders, all while making the arduous journey to Robben Island. Each visit was a stark reminder of the husband and father who was absent from their daily lives, yet a painful encounter that offered little solace, and often left both parties feeling more bereft than before. The journey itself was long and expensive, a significant burden for families already struggling under the weight of apartheid's economic and social injustices. These limited and controlled contacts served as a cruel illustration of the regime's determination to sever all bonds. Yet the enduring efforts of families to maintain these connections spoke to an unbreakable human spirit. While Nelson Mandela and his comrades endured the harsh realities of imprisonment, a powerful tide of opposition to apartheid was steadily rising across the globe. The international community slowly but surely began to recognize the profound injustice of the South African regime and the inherent immorality of its policies. This growing awareness translated into a sustained and multifaceted campaign of pressure, seeking to isolate the apartheid government and compel it towards reform. Sanctions became a primary tool of this international resistance. Economic sanctions, initially sporadic, grew in scope and intensity. Nations and international bodies imposed restrictions on trade, investment, and financial transactions with South Africa. The aim was to weaken the regime's economic foundation, making the cost of maintaining apartheid too high to bear. These measures were not always universally adopted or perfectly enforced, yet their cumulative effect began to be felt within the South African economy. Cultural and sports boycotts also gained significant traction. South African athletes and artists found themselves increasingly unwelcome on the international stage. Sporting events, a source of national pride for many white South Africans, became battlegrounds for anti-apartheid activists. The iconic image of athletes refusing to compete against South African teams or musicians declining to perform there sent a clear message of global condemnation. These boycotts, while perhaps less tangible than economic sanctions, had a profound psychological impact, further isolating the white minority government. Beyond official sanctions and boycotts, a widespread grassroots movement of global advocacy emerged. Anti-apartheid movements flourished in universities, churches, and communities across continents. Activists organized protests, distributed literature, and lobbied their own governments to take a stronger stance against Pretoria. Figures like Mandela, though unseen, became powerful symbols for this movement, their names echoing in speeches and on protest banners. This sustained international pressure, a slow and deliberate process, began to chip away at the legitimacy and resilience of the apartheid state, laying the groundwork for future change. After nearly 2 decades on Robben Island, a significant change in Nelson Mandela's imprisonment occurred in 1982. He, along with several other senior African National Congress leaders, was transferred from the familiar, if harsh, confines of the island prison to Pollsmoor Prison on the mainland, located in Tokai, a suburb of Cape Town. This move marked a new phase in their incarceration, a subtle shift in the landscape of their daily lives. Yet the motivations behind this transfer were complex. It is believed that the government wished to remove Mandela and his most influential colleagues from Robben Island, which had become an internationally recognized symbol of resistance and a de facto university for political prisoners. By moving them closer to the mainland, perhaps the authorities hoped to diminish their symbolic power and disrupt the established networks of solidarity and intellectual exchange that had flourished on the island. Additionally, there may have been a desire to prepare for eventual negotiations, though this was not explicitly stated at the time. Pollsmoor Prison presented a different environment. While still a high-security facility, the conditions were in some aspects slightly less brutal than those experienced on Robben Island. The physical labour that had been a constant feature of their early years on the island was no longer a requirement. The cells, while still small and restrictive, were located within a more modern prison structure. There was a subtle improvement in the quality of the food and the general living standards, though these were still far from comfortable or humane. However, the transfer did not signify a fundamental change in their status as political prisoners. The restrictions on their communication with the outside world remained largely in place. Visits were still tightly controlled, and their freedom of movement within the prison was severely limited. The primary objective of their imprisonment, to remove them from society and silence their voices, remained unchanged. Yet the presence of Mandela and his comrades in Pollsmoor, now physically closer to the heart of South African society, subtly altered the dynamics of their ongoing struggle. It brought them, in a geographical sense, a step closer to the very forces they were challenging, even as their physical freedom remained denied. As the 1980s progressed, the relentless pressure of international sanctions and the growing internal unrest within South Africa began to create a slow, almost imperceptible shift in the government's stance. Within this changing climate, a series of profoundly significant yet entirely clandestine engagements began to unfold. These were the first tentative steps towards direct communication between the imprisoned Nelson Mandela and the apartheid government that held him captive. The initiative for these secret negotiations originated not from a grand public declaration, but from within the corridors of power, specifically through Justice Minister Kobe Coetzee. In 1985, Coetzee made his first visit to Mandela in Pollsmoor Prison. This initial encounter was not a negotiation in the formal sense, but rather an exploratory meeting, a quiet probing of possibilities. It was a moment of immense symbolic weight, marking the very first time a senior government official had engaged directly with Mandela since his sentencing. The nature of these talks was steeped in absolute secrecy. Both sides understood the immense sensitivity of the situation. For the government, public acknowledgement of discussions with Mandela, whom they still officially branded a terrorist, would have been politically perilous, risking a backlash from hardline elements within their own party and among the white electorate. For Mandela and the ANC, premature disclosure could have undermined their international support and created divisions within the anti-apartheid movement, which was committed to the principle of no negotiation without liberation. These early discussions were informal, often taking place in Mandela's cell or in the prison director's office. They involved carefully chosen intermediaries, building trust slowly and painstakingly. The initial agenda was not to strike a deal, but to establish a channel of communication, to understand each other's positions, and to explore whether any common ground for future dialogue existed. It was a delicate dance performed away from the public gaze, laying the groundwork for the profound transformations that would eventually reshape South Africa. The clandestine discussions, while laying groundwork, and did not prevent the government from making a public move in 1985. President P.W. Botha, under immense internal and external pressure, offered Nelson Mandela a conditional release. This offer was presented to Mandela in prison and then publicly announced by Botha in a speech to Parliament on January 31st, 1985. The condition was clear and non-negotiable from the government's perspective. Mandela had to unconditionally renounce violence and the armed struggle. Only then would he be granted freedom. For many years, the South African government had maintained that Mandela was an unrepentant communist and a terrorist. This offer of release, even with its stringent condition, represented a notable shift, an implicit acknowledgement of Mandela's symbolic power and the growing international clamour for his freedom. The world watched, waiting to see how the imprisoned leader would respond. Mandela's answer, however, was not delivered in person. He was, after all, still a prisoner. Instead, his powerful and unwavering refusal was conveyed to the public by his daughter, Zinzi Mandela, at a rally in Soweto on February 10th, 1985. Her voice carried her father's resolute message, a message that resonated deeply across South Africa and around the globe. In his statement, Mandela articulated why he could not accept a conditional freedom. He declared that only free men could negotiate. A prisoner could not enter into contracts. He insisted that the armed struggle was a defensive measure, a response to the government's violence and its refusal to engage in peaceful political processes. He stated that he would not betray his people by abandoning the struggle, while the very system of apartheid remained intact. His words were a reaffirmation of his commitment, not merely to his own freedom, but to the freedom of all South Africans from racial oppression. This refusal solidified his moral authority and further galvanized the anti-apartheid movement. After years spent within the confines of Pollsmoor prison, a significant change occurred in December 1988. Nelson Mandela was quietly transferred once more, this time to Victor Verster Prison, located near Paarl in the Western Cape. This was not a typical prison facility. Instead of the stark institutional blocks of Robben Island or Pollsmoor, Victor Verster offered a bungalow-style accommodation, complete with a private garden and a swimming pool. It was a setting notably different from any prison Mandela had experienced before. This transfer was not a gesture of benevolence, but a calculated strategic manoeuvre by the South African government. By this point, the secret discussions with Mandela had become more frequent and serious, even as they remained largely unknown to the public. The government recognised the growing inevitability of Mandela's eventual release and the necessity of direct negotiations with him regarding the future of South Africa. Moving him to Victor Verster serves several key purposes. Firstly, the more comfortable and secluded environment was intended to further facilitate these sensitive negotiations. The bungalow offered a degree of privacy and a less formal atmosphere, conducive to extended discussions away from the rigid structures of a maximum security prison. It allowed for greater discretion, minimizing the risk of leaks that could derail the delicate political process. Secondly, the government aimed to manage Mandela's transition from prisoner to public figure. By placing him in a more relaxed setting, they hoped to ease him back into a semblance of normal life, allowing him to adapt to a world that had changed considerably during his long incarceration. It was also a way to subtly prepare him for the eventual public role he would undoubtedly play. Thirdly, this move was a strategic signal. While still imprisoned, the improved conditions and the nature of the facility hinted at a coming shift in policy. A quiet acknowledgement that Mandela was no longer simply a political prisoner, but a central figure in the impending transformation of the nation. It was a step designed to create an environment where the difficult work of dismantling apartheid could begin in earnest, with Mandela at the heart of the emerging dialogue. In September of 1989, a pivotal shift occurred within the leadership of South Africa. F.W. de Klerk ascended to the presidency, succeeding P.W. Botha. De Klerk, a lifelong member of the National Party, initially held a reputation as a conservative figure, yet his tenure would mark the most dramatic and unexpected changes in the nation's modern history. Upon assuming office, de Klerk inherited a country teetering on the brink. International sanctions were tightening their grip, the economy was faltering, and internal unrest, fueled by the anti-apartheid movement, was escalating. Crucially, the government's long-held belief in the indefinite sustainability of apartheid was crumbling. Years of resistance, both internal and external, had demonstrated that the system was not only morally indefensible, but also practically unworkable in the long term. De Klerk, unlike some of his predecessors, possessed a pragmatic understanding of this reality. He recognized that maintaining apartheid was leading South Africa towards isolation and potential collapse. He quietly began to articulate a reformist agenda, one that acknowledged the need for fundamental change rather than merely superficial adjustments. This was a significant departure from previous government stances, which had largely focused on maintaining the existing racial hierarchy through various forms of repression and minor concessions. His leadership ushered in a new phase of engagement, not only with the international community but, more importantly, with Nelson Mandela. The secret talks that had begun under Botha's administration now gained renewed impetus and direction under de Klerk. The new president understood that any genuine path forward for South Africa would necessarily involve direct dialogue with the imprisoned leader, who had become the undeniable symbol of the anti-apartheid struggle. De Klerk's presidency therefore marked a turning point. It signalled a readiness, however reluctant, within the highest echelons of the National Party to confront the deeply entrenched injustices of apartheid and to begin charting a course towards a different future, and as a path that would inevitably lead to the release of Nelson Mandela and the unbanning of political organisations. On February 2nd, 1990, the South African Parliament convened for its opening session, a day that would forever be etched into the nation's memory. President F.W. de Klerk stood before the assembled members, and indeed before the watchful eyes of a global audience, to deliver a speech that would dismantle decades of apartheid policy with a quiet yet profound force. With a steady voice, de Klerk began to outline a series of radical reforms. The first pronouncement, delivered with a calm precision, was the unbanning of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party, and a host of other anti-apartheid organisations that had been outlawed for decades. This single act immediately transformed the political landscape, opening the door for legitimate political activity for millions who had been denied a voice. The news resonated across the nation and the world, signalling a genuine commitment to change. But the most anticipated and impactful announcement was yet to come. With a deliberate cadence, de Klerk then declared the imminent release of Nelson Mandela. He stated that Mandela would be freed without any conditions, removing the previous demands for a renunciation of violence that had been a sticking point for so long. The president affirmed that the time had come to break the cycle of violence and begin negotiations for a new constitutional dispensation. This moment was truly seismic. For 27 years, Mandela had been a captive symbol, his image and cause inspiring a global movement. Now, the prospect of his physical freedom, articulated by the very government that had imprisoned him, was suddenly real. The announcement sent shockwaves of hope and disbelief through South Africa and around the world. It was an acknowledgement that the apartheid state, despite its formidable power, could no longer withstand the tide of history and the relentless pursuit of justice. The path towards a democratic South Africa, though still fraught with challenges, had been definitively opened. The morning of February 11th, 1990 dawned with an almost palpable sense of anticipation. All eyes, both within South Africa and across the globe, were fixed on the Victor Verster prison, nestled amidst the vineyards outside Paarl. A vast crowd had gathered, a sea of faces representing every corner of the nation. Their collective breath held in the silent expectation of a moment that had seemed impossible for nearly 3 decades. Journalists from every major news organisation had converged, their cameras and microphones poised to capture history as it unfolded. The air hummed with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, a quiet roar of human emotion waiting to erupt. For many, this day was more than just the release of a man. It was the symbolic unchaining of a nation. As the afternoon hours approached, a white car, a modest Ford sedan, slowly emerged from the prison gates. In the passenger seat sat Nelson Mandela, a figure whose face was instantly recognizable, yet subtly altered by the passage of time. Beside him walked his then-wife, Winnie Mandela, her presence a poignant testament to the long years of separation and struggle. A hush fell over the crowd, quickly followed by an explosion of cheers, ululations and joyous shouts. Mandela, holding Winnie's hand, raised his other fist in a gesture that was both a greeting and a symbol of continued defiance. His stride was firm, his bearing dignified, even as the enormity of the moment enveloped him. He paused, surveying the multitude, his expression a mixture of profound emotion and quiet resolve. The images of his walk to freedom were broadcast instantaneously across the world, eliciting tears of joy and celebration in countless homes and public spaces. After 27 years, 6 months and 6 days, Nelson Mandela was a free man. This was not merely a personal liberation, it was a profound turning point, marking the definitive end of an era and the hopeful yet challenging beginning of another. The world watched, collectively breathing a sigh of relief as the symbol of resistance stepped into the light of a new day. From Victor Verster prison, Nelson Mandela was transported to the heart of Cape Town. The destination was the grand balcony of City Hall, a historic landmark overlooking a square already overflowing with hundreds of thousands of people. The crowd, a vibrant tapestry of South African society, had waited patiently, their anticipation reaching a crescendo as evening began to fall. As Mandela appeared on the balcony, illuminated by the city lights and the flash of cameras, an almost deafening roar erupted. For many present, this was the first time they had seen their leader in person. His voice, though slightly raspy from disuse and the raw emotion of the day, resonated with a quiet authority that commanded tension. His speech was a masterful exercise in balancing gratitude with a clear articulation of the path forward. He began by thanking the people of South Africa and the international community for their unwavering support. He acknowledged President F.W. de Klerk for his willingness to engage in dialogue, a crucial gesture of reconciliation. Yet, Mandela also made it unequivocally clear that the struggle was not over. He affirmed the African National Congress's commitment to armed struggle, though emphasizing that negotiations were now the primary means to achieve a democratic, non-racial South Africa. He called for unity, for discipline, and for continued pressure on the apartheid government to dismantle its remaining structures of oppression. He spoke of justice, of the need to address the deep-seated inequalities that had scarred the nation. As he invoked the spirit of the Freedom Charter, reiterating its vision of a society where all were equal, regardless of race. His message was both firm and inclusive, extending an olive branch while holding steadfast to the principles for which he had sacrificed so much. The address concluded not with triumph, but with a call to action, setting the tone for the challenging negotiations that lay ahead and signalling that the journey to a truly free South Africa had only just begun. With Nelson Mandela's release and the unbanning of political organisations, South Africa entered a profoundly intricate period of negotiation. The task was monumental: to dismantle decades of institutionalised racism and construct a new democratic framework that would be acceptable to all its peoples. This process was not linear, nor was it without immense tension and frequent setbacks. The primary forums for these discussions were the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, known as CODESA I and CODESA II. These multi-party talks brought together representatives from the African National Congress, the National Party government, and various other political groups. The atmosphere was often charged, marked by deeply entrenched mistrust and fundamentally opposing visions for the nation's future. Mandela's leadership during these negotiations was pivotal. He navigated the complex political landscape with a blend of unwavering principle and pragmatic flexibility. He insisted on the fundamental tenets of universal suffrage and a non-racial constitution, yet he also understood the necessity of compromise to avoid a catastrophic civil war. His calm demeanour often served as an anchor amidst heated exchanges, and his ability to connect with former adversaries on a personal level frequently thawed frozen positions. However, the path was fraught with violence. Political assassinations, clashes between rival factions, and acts of state-sponsored destabilization threatened to derail the entire process. The assassination of ANC leader Chris Hani in April 1993, for instance, plunged the country into a crisis that Mandela skillfully diffused through a powerful televised address, appealing for calm and unity. Despite these immense challenges, Mandela remained steadfast in his commitment to a peaceful transition. He understood that the future of South Africa depended on the ability of its leaders to transcend historical grievances and forge a shared destiny. And the negotiations were a testament to his strategic patience and his deep-seated belief in the power of dialogue, even with those who had once been his jailers. These discussions slowly, painstakingly laid the groundwork for the first democratic elections, promising a new dawn for the nation. In 1993, as the intricate process of negotiation continued to unfold in South Africa, a significant international recognition was bestowed upon two key figures in the transition, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. They were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This honour acknowledged their profound efforts in dismantling the structures of apartheid and in laying the foundational stones for a new democratic South Africa. The decision by the Norwegian Nobel Committee highlighted the extraordinary nature of the transition. It recognised not only Mandela's lifelong struggle against racial oppression and his steadfast commitment to a peaceful, multiracial future, but also de Klerk's courageous steps in initiating the reforms that ultimately led to the end of apartheid. It was a testament to the idea that even deeply entrenched systems of injustice could be overcome through a combination of sustained resistance and bold political leadership. The ceremony itself was a moment of profound symbolism. To see the former political prisoner and the head of the apartheid state standing together, accepting the world's most prestigious peace award, conveyed a powerful message of reconciliation and the possibility of transformation. Mandela, in his acceptance speech, dedicated the prize to all the people who had suffered and sacrificed in the long struggle for justice. He spoke of the common humanity that binds all individuals, regardless of race or background, and emphasized the need for forgiveness and healing as the nation moved forward. De Klerk also delivered an address, acknowledging the historical injustices and expressing hope for a future built on equality. While their shared platform did not erase the deep ideological differences that still existed, it underscored a shared commitment to preventing further bloodshed and guiding the nation towards a democratic future. The Nobel Peace Prize served as a global affirmation of the difficult but essential work being undertaken in South Africa, offering a beacon of hope for peaceful conflict resolution around the world. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the immense courage required to dismantle an oppressive system from within and without. In April of 1994, a moment long anticipated and tirelessly fought for finally arrived in South Africa, the nation's first democratic elections. For the very first time in its history, citizens of all races, regardless of their skin colour, were granted the right to cast a vote. It was an event that transcended mere political process. It was a profound act of national liberation, a visible manifestation of the dream of equality finally taking root. The atmosphere across the country during those days was one of quiet yet palpable excitement. Long queues formed at polling stations, stretching for hundreds of metres, comprised of people who had waited their entire lives for this singular opportunity. Elderly men and women, many of whom had endured decades of disenfranchisement, stood patiently alongside younger generations, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and quiet dignity. The sight of people of all backgrounds, black and white, Indian and coloured, standing together, united by the simple act of participation, was deeply moving. There was a sense of collective triumph that settled over the land. The long shadow of apartheid, which had dictated every aspect of life for so many, was visibly lifting. Each ballot cast was not merely a choice for a candidate or a party, but a profound declaration of human dignity and a rejection of a painful past. It was a tangible step into a future where every voice mattered, where every citizen held a stake in the nation's destiny. Nelson Mandela himself, now a candidate for the presidency, cast his vote in the township of Ananda. His presence at the polling booth, once an unthinkable act for a black South African, symbolised the immense journey the nation had undertaken. The process, while not without its logistical challenges, unfolded largely peacefully, a testament to the collective desire for a new beginning. As the votes were counted, an undeniable sense of hope began to bloom across the new South Africa, signalling the dawn of a truly inclusive nation. On May 10th, 1994, a new chapter for South Africa began as Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the country's first democratically elected president. The ceremony unfolded in the amphitheatre of the Union Buildings in Pretoria, a site that had once been a bastion of the apartheid regime. Now it hosted a gathering of profound historical significance, attended by leaders and dignitaries from across the globe, all bearing witness to a monumental transformation. The air was filled with a sense of joyous solemnity. The sky above Pretoria, a clear autumn blue, seemed to reflect the clarity and hope of the moment. Mandela, having spent 27 years incarcerated for his beliefs, now stood before his nation and the world, ready to assume the highest office. His ascent to the presidency was not merely a personal victory, but a powerful emblem of resilience and the triumph of the human spirit over oppression. His inaugural address, delivered with a calm and resonant voice, spoke of healing, reconciliation, and the building of a new society where all would be treated with dignity. He articulated a vision for a non-racial South Africa, free from the divisions of the past, a rainbow nation at peace with itself and the world. The words resonated deeply, not only with the millions of South Africans listening, but also with a global audience that had followed the anti-apartheid struggle for decades. The symbolism of the moment was immense. Here was a nation, once defined by its brutal system of racial segregation, now embracing a future founded on democracy and equality. Mandela, a man who had embodied the struggle against injustice, now personified the nation's capacity for forgiveness and its aspiration for unity. His inauguration sent a clear message to the world that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal, and that freedom, when pursued with unwavering resolve, could ultimately prevail. It was a beacon of hope, demonstrating that peaceful transition from oppression to democracy was not merely an ideal, but a tangible reality. Following his inauguration, President Mandela moved swiftly to establish the Government of National Unity. This unique political arrangement was designed to bridge the deep chasm of mistrust and division that apartheid had created. It brought together the African National Congress, the National Party, and the Inkatha Freedom Party, former adversaries who now had to learn to govern side by side. This unprecedented collaboration was a testament to Mandela's vision of an inclusive South Africa. F.W. de Klerk, the last apartheid-era president, served as one of two deputy presidents, alongside Thabo Mbeki of the ANC. This arrangement was not merely a political compromise. It was a deliberate strategy to ensure stability during a fragile transition and to harness the expertise and participation of all significant political forces, as Mandela's leadership during this period was characterized by a relentless focus on reconciliation. He understood that true nation-building required more than just political change. It demanded a transformation of hearts and minds. He consistently reached out to those who had been part of the former regime, demonstrating a profound capacity for forgiveness and an unwavering belief in the possibility of a shared future. His actions often defied expectations. He embraced symbols that had once been associated with apartheid, such as the Springbok rugby team, to unite a divided populace. He understood that gestures, both large and small, were essential in dismantling the psychological barriers that had separated South Africans for generations. The Government of National Unity faced immense challenges, from economic inequality to social fragmentation. Yet its formation and the spirit of collaboration it fostered laid a crucial foundation for the new democratic South Africa. It was a period of deliberate, sometimes difficult integration, guided by Mandela's steadfast commitment to healing and forging a unified national identity. To address the profound traumas of the past, a unique and pioneering institution was established, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This body represented a deliberate departure from the traditional post-conflict justice models, such as Nuremberg-style trials, which often focus solely on punishment. Instead, its primary aim was to heal the deep wounds inflicted by apartheid through a process of truth-telling and restorative justice. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a revered anti-apartheid activist and Nobel Peace Laureate, was appointed to chair the commission. His moral authority, compassion, and unwavering commitment to justice made him an ideal leader for such a sensitive undertaking. Under his guidance, the TRC embarked on a monumental task: to investigate gross human rights violations that occurred between 1960 and 1994, the period of apartheid's most brutal enforcement. The Commission's mandate had several key pillars. Firstly, it sought to uncover the truth about past atrocities, giving victims an opportunity to share their stories publicly. These testimonies, often harrowing and deeply personal, were heard in open hearings across the country, broadcast to the nation, ensuring that the collective memory of apartheid's horrors would not be forgotten. Secondly, it offered a path to conditional amnesty for perpetrators who fully disclosed their politically motivated crimes. This meant that individuals who committed human rights violations could avoid prosecution if they came forward, confessed their actions truthfully, and demonstrated that their deeds were indeed politically motivated. This controversial provision was seen as a necessary compromise to encourage disclosure and prevent a protracted period of recrimination and instability. The overarching purpose of the TRC was not retribution but reconciliation. It aimed to foster understanding, acknowledge suffering, and lay the groundwork for a future built on respect and human dignity. By confronting the past directly, the Commission sought to prevent its recurrence and to facilitate a collective healing process for a fractured nation. It was an ambitious experiment in restorative justice, striving to find a path forward from immense pain. With political liberation achieved, the new government under President Mandela faced formidable economic challenges. Decades of apartheid had created a deeply unequal society, characterized by vast disparities in wealth, income and access to basic services. Millions of black South Africans lived in poverty, lacked adequate housing, education and healthcare, while a privileged minority held the vast majority of economic power. The task was to transform this legacy of systemic disadvantage into a more equitable and prosperous nation. Mandela's approach to economic policy was marked by a profound pragmatism. While the ANC's historical rhetoric had often leaned towards nationalisation and socialist ideals, the realities of governing a fragile new democracy in a globalised economy necessitated a more cautious path. The government understood the urgent need to address the social needs of its long marginalised population, promising improved living conditions and expanded opportunities. However, it also recognised the critical importance of maintaining investor confidence and ensuring economic stability. This delicate balance was reflected in the government's economic strategy. While there was a commitment to expanding social programs, such as providing access to clean water, electricity and housing, these initiatives were carefully managed within fiscal constraints. The government largely avoided large-scale nationalisation, instead emphasising fiscal discipline, controlling inflation and promoting foreign investment. This more moderate stance was designed to reassure both domestic and international markets, signalling that the new South Africa was a stable and responsible economic partner. Mandela understood that radical economic shifts could destabilise the nascent democracy and deter the investment needed for growth. His administration sought to gradually redress historical imbalances while carefully navigating the complexities of a post-apartheid economy. The aim was to build a foundation for sustainable development, one that could eventually uplift all South Africans without undermining the broader economic framework. This pragmatic path, though sometimes criticised by those advocating for more rapid transformation, was deemed essential for the nation's long-term stability and progress. As the end of his first term approached, Nelson Mandela made a decision that further cemented his unique place in history and in the hearts of his people. In 1999, at the age of 80, he chose to step down from the presidency, declining to seek a second term. This act was not merely a personal choice. It was a profound statement about the nature of democracy and leadership in Africa. In a continent where many leaders had historically clung to power for extended periods, Mandela's voluntary relinquishment of office set a powerful and inspiring precedent for the peaceful and democratic transfer of power. He believed firmly in the principle that no individual should be indispensable, and that institutions, not personalities, should govern. His decision underscored his commitment to strengthening South Africa's nascent democratic structures and fostering a culture of accountability and constitutionalism. It demonstrated a profound trust in the democratic process and in the capacity of his colleagues to continue the work of nation-building. Upon leaving the highest office, Mandela didn't retreat into complete seclusion. Instead, he transitioned into the role of a revered elder statesman, a global icon whose moral authority and wisdom remained undiminished. He continued to advocate for peace, reconciliation, and social justice on an international stage. His post-presidency years were dedicated to various causes, including the fight against HIV/AIDS, a pandemic that was devastating South Africa and the wider continent. He used his immense influence to raise awareness, He challenged stigma and mobilized resources for treatment and prevention. He also devoted significant time to the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund and the Mandela Rhodes Foundation, demonstrating his enduring commitment to the welfare and education of future generations. His public appearances became less frequent but always carried significant weight, offering guidance and perspective on pressing global issues. Mandela's transition from president to elder statesman was not a diminution of his impact, but rather a transformation, allowing his moral voice to resonate even more broadly, free from the direct responsibilities of governance. He became a living symbol of hope, forgiveness, and the enduring power of humanity. Even after his retirement from the formal duties of the presidency, Nelson Mandela's voice continued to resonate across the globe, carrying an unparalleled moral authority. His post-presidency years were characterized by a relentless dedication to various humanitarian causes and global advocacy. He understood that his influence could still be a powerful force for good in the world, and he utilized it with careful consideration. A significant portion of his later years was dedicated to combating the devastating HIV/AIDS pandemic, which was disproportionately affecting South Africa and other African nations. Initially, there had been a reluctance in some quarters to openly address the crisis. However, Mandela, with his characteristic courage, confronted the issue head-on. He spoke candidly about the disease, challenging the widespread stigma associated with it and urging for greater openness, education, and access to treatment. His personal grief following the death of his son Magatho from AIDS-related complications in 2005 further fueled his advocacy. He publicly announced the cause of his son's death, a groundbreaking act that helped to demystify the illness and encourage others to speak out. Beyond the specific fight against HIV/AIDS, Mandela remained a tireless advocate for peace and human rights. He lent his support to various international initiatives, often mediating in conflicts and promoting dialogue between warring factions. His presence at global forums brought an undeniable gravitas, and his quiet counsel was sought by leaders from every corner of the world. He consistently championed the cause of the marginalized and oppressed, drawing upon his own experiences to offer empathy and insight. His global influence was not tied to any political office, but stemmed from the profound respect he had earned through a lifetime of sacrifice, integrity, and reconciliation. He became a universal symbol of hope, a living embodiment of the idea that even the deepest divisions could be overcome through dialogue and a shared commitment to justice. His post-presidency work underscored his unwavering belief in the inherent dignity of every human being and his vision for a more just and peaceful world. Amidst his continued global engagements, Nelson Mandela also found solace and warmth in his personal life during his later years. A significant chapter unfolded with his marriage to Graça Machel in 1998, on his 81st birthday. Machel, the widow of former Mozambican President Samora Machel, was an accomplished humanitarian and politician in her own right. Their union was often described as a partnership of equals, founded on mutual respect, shared values, and a deep understanding of the burdens and privileges that came with their public lives. Graça Machel brought a quiet strength and companionship to Mandela's world, creating a sanctuary of domestic tranquility that had often eluded him in his tumultuous past. His later years also saw him embrace the role of a grandfather with profound joy. Surrounded by his numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren, he could often be found in more relaxed settings, far from the glare of international politics. These were moments of simple pleasure, of storytelling, and of imparting wisdom in a more intimate, personal way. He cherished the opportunity to witness the growth of his extended family, a tangible legacy of the future he had fought so hard to secure. There was a noticeable shift in his public persona during this period, moving from the dynamic political leader to a revered elder statesman. He gradually withdrew from the most demanding aspects of public life, choosing his engagements more selectively. This afforded him more time for reflection, for quiet contemplation at his home in Houghton, Johannesburg, or in his ancestral village of Kunu. He spent time reading, writing, and simply being, allowing himself a measure of peace after decades of relentless struggle and service. These were the years when the image of Madiba, as he was affectionately known, became synonymous not just with freedom and justice, but also with wisdom, serenity, and the enduring power of the human spirit. He found a gentle rhythm in his daily existence, a quiet grace that belied the monumental impact of his life. As the years progressed, the immense toll of decades of struggle, imprisonment, and the demands of leadership began to manifest in Nelson Mandela's physical well-being. His health, though remarkably resilient for many years after his release, started to decline in a more pronounced way. What began as occasional hospital visits for routine checks gradually evolved into more frequent and serious admissions, often related to recurring respiratory infections. The harsh conditions of his 27 years in prison, particularly the damp cells and lack of proper medical care for extended periods, had left a lasting impact on his lungs. The world watched with a blend of admiration and growing concern as Mandela, once a figure of robust strength and boundless energy, became increasingly frail. Each public appearance, though carefully managed, revealed a man whose physical presence was diminishing, though his spirit remained undimmed. He moved with greater difficulty. His voice, once booming and resonant, became softer, and his public engagements grew fewer and further between. News reports of his hospitalizations would invariably trigger an outpouring of national and international anxiety. South Africa in particular held its breath during these periods, acutely aware that the architect of its democracy was nearing the end of his extraordinary journey. Candlelit vigils were held outside hospitals, prayers were offered in churches and mosques, and messages of support flooded in from every corner of the globe. Leaders and ordinary citizens alike acknowledged the profound significance of his life and the impending void his departure would leave. His family, led by Greya Machiel, provided a protective circle around him, ensuring his comfort and dignity in these challenging times. Medical bulletins, often sparse but carefully worded, became a regular feature of national news, reflecting the deep collective concern for his well-being. The world was preparing itself for an inevitable farewell, watching with quiet reverence as the giant of history slowly, gracefully began his long goodbye. On the evening of December 5th, 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela passed away peacefully at his home in Houghton, Johannesburg. His death, though anticipated after a prolonged illness and periods of critical health, still sent a profound ripple across South Africa and the world. The announcement came from the then President Jacob Zuma, who delivered the news to a grieving nation with solemn words, confirming that the country had lost its greatest son. The immediate aftermath was characterized by an outpouring of emotion, a collective moment of sorrow and profound respect. In South Africa, spontaneous gatherings formed in townships and cities. People sang freedom songs, lit candles and laid flowers, transforming public spaces into impromptu memorials. The national flag was lowered to half-mast, a visible symbol of the nation's mourning. Across the diverse spectrum of South African society, from the youngest children to the oldest citizens, there was a shared sense of loss, intertwined with immense gratitude for the life he'd lived. Beyond South Africa's borders, the tributes were equally swift and heartfelt. Heads of state, religious leaders, cultural icons, and countless individuals from every continent offered their condolences and reflections. He was remembered as a beacon of hope, a symbol of justice, and a testament to the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. The world acknowledged the passing of not just a political leader, but a moral compass, whose unwavering commitment to equality and human dignity had inspired generations. News channels across the globe halted regular programming to broadcast special reports, recounting his epic journey from prisoner to president and celebrating his enduring legacy. The silence that fell over the world was a testament to the magnitude of the figure who had departed. The period following Nelson Mandela's passing became a profound national moment of remembrance for South Africa. A series of events unfolded, meticulously planned to honour his extraordinary life and allow the nation to grieve collectively. 10 days of official mourning were declared, during which the country paused to reflect on his contributions. The first major public event was a national memorial service held at the FNB Stadium in Johannesburg on December 10th. Despite persistent rain, tens of thousands of South Africans, alongside numerous world leaders, filled the stadium. The atmosphere was one of solemn celebration, marked by hymns, speeches, and traditional songs. Dignitaries from across the political spectrum, including President Barack Obama, delivered eulogies that spoke to Mandela's universal appeal and his unwavering commitment to justice. This gathering served as a powerful testament to his ability to unite, even in death, bringing together people from vastly different backgrounds in shared reverence. Following the memorial, Mandela's body lay in state for 3 days at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, the very place where he had been inaugurated as the nation's first democratic president. Each day, thousands upon thousands of ordinary citizens queued for hours, sometimes overnight, under the African sun to pay their final respects. They filed past his open casket, offering silent prayers, salutes, or simply a moment of quiet contemplation. This public viewing allowed individuals to connect personally with the man who'd come to embody their aspirations for a free and equal society. The procession of his coffin through the streets of Pretoria each morning and evening was met by crowds lining the route, singing and dancing in a uniquely South African expression of grief and celebration. These ceremonies were not merely formalities. They were deeply meaningful rituals that allowed South Africa to process the immense loss of its founding father. They served to reinforce his legacy, reminding the nation of the values he championed: reconciliation, unity, and perseverance. The collective remembrance fostered a sense of shared identity and purpose, reinforcing the ideals for which he had sacrificed so much. The news of Nelson Mandela's death resonated across the globe, eliciting an unprecedented wave of tributes from leaders and ordinary citizens alike. From heads of state to school children, countless individuals paused to acknowledge the passing of a figure who had transcended national boundaries and political divides. Flags were lowered to half-mast in numerous countries, and public buildings were illuminated in his honour. Statements poured in from every continent, universally recognizing his profound impact. The United Nations Security Council observed a moment of silence, and its Secretary-General lauded him as a giant for justice. World leaders, many of whom had personally encountered Mandela, shared anecdotes and reflections on his wisdom, his humility, and his unwavering moral compass. They spoke of his unique ability to inspire hope in the darkest of times and to champion forgiveness over vengeance. Beyond official pronouncements, a more grassroots outpouring of grief and admiration was evident. Vigils were held in city squares, impromptu memorials sprang up with flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, and social media platforms became a canvas for shared memories and expressions of sorrow. People recalled his iconic images: the defiant young activist, the dignified prisoner, the smiling elder statesman. His contributions to peace and reconciliation were particularly highlighted. He was remembered not only for dismantling apartheid, but for demonstrating a path forward for societies grappling with deep-seated conflict and division. His life became a teaching moment, a testament to the power of dialogue, empathy, and persistent struggle for human dignity. This global recognition underscored his status not merely as a national hero, but as an enduring symbol of humanity's capacity for transformation and redemption. His legacy was firmly etched into the collective consciousness, an inspiration for generations to come. Nelson Mandela's journey through life, marked by immense struggle and ultimate triumph, solidified his place as an enduring symbol of hope for people everywhere. His narrative, deeply rooted in the fight against injustice, transcended the specific context of apartheid to speak to universal human aspirations. He embodied the belief that even in the face of overwhelming oppression, the human spirit can not only endure but can also prevail. His capacity for forgiveness, particularly after decades of brutal imprisonment, remains one of the most remarkable aspects of his legacy. This was not a passive acceptance of past wrongs, but an active, strategic choice to embrace reconciliation as the only viable path to a peaceful and democratic future for South Africa. This act of grace resonated deeply, offering a powerful example to societies grappling with historical grievances and the difficult work of healing. The power of perseverance, a central theme in Mandela's life, also continues to inspire. His unwavering commitment to his ideals, even when imprisoned and isolated, demonstrated a profound resilience. He proved that sustained effort, combined with moral conviction, can ultimately dismantle seemingly insurmountable systems of oppression. His long walk to freedom became a metaphor for any struggle requiring patience, dedication, and an unshakable belief in a just outcome. Mandela's appeal extended far beyond political boundaries or cultural differences. He became a global icon, admired by individuals from diverse backgrounds, who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles for dignity, equality, and self-determination. He represented the quiet strength that can emerge from suffering, the transformative potential of empathy, and the possibility of building a more just world. His life story continues to offer a beacon, reminding us that even in the most challenging circumstances, hope remains a powerful guiding force. The foundational ideals that guided Nelson Mandela's life, equality, justice, and reconciliation, continue to hold profound relevance in the contemporary world. Though the specific battles may differ, the underlying human desire for fairness and dignity remains constant, and Mandela's principles provide a timeless framework for addressing these aspirations. His unwavering commitment to equality, the belief that all individuals, regardless of race, origin, or circumstance, possess inherent worth and deserve equal opportunities, resonates deeply in an era still grappling with systemic disparities. Movements advocating for civil rights, gender equality, and economic justice in various nations often draw inspiration from the long struggle against apartheid, seeing in Mandela's example a testament to the power of collective action in dismantling entrenched prejudices. The pursuit of justice, a cornerstone of Mandela's philosophy, extends beyond merely punishing wrongdoing. For him, it encompassed the creation of societal structures that prevent injustice from occurring, and the establishment of legal and social systems that uphold the rights of all. Today, activists and reformers globally invoke his name when challenging corruption, advocating for human rights, or striving for judicial reforms, recognizing his insistence that true freedom necessitates a just society for everyone. Perhaps most uniquely, Mandela's emphasis on reconciliation offers a critical lesson for a world often divided by conflict and historical wounds. His approach, which sought to bridge divides rather than widen them, to heal rather than to perpetuate cycles of vengeance, provides a powerful model for post-conflict societies and communities fractured by deep-seated tensions. The notion of restorative justice, of seeking understanding and rebuilding trust, finds a strong precedent in the South African transition that Mandela so skillfully navigated. His legacy thus serves not merely as a historical account, but as an active, living inspiration. His ideals continue to fuel the efforts of countless individuals and organizations working towards a more equitable and peaceful global community, demonstrating that the principles he championed in South Africa possess a universal applicability, offering guidance for the ongoing human journey toward a more just and harmonious existence. While the monumental achievement of ending apartheid in South Africa stands as a testament to Nelson Mandela's leadership and the resilience of its people, the nation's journey towards a truly equitable society remains ongoing. The dismantling of discriminatory laws was a crucial first step, but it did not instantly erase the deep-seated economic disparities and social inequalities forged over decades of segregation. South Africa continues to grapple with significant challenges, including persistent poverty, high unemployment rates, and a pronounced wealth gap that often aligns with historical racial divisions. Issues such as inadequate access to quality education and healthcare in certain communities, along with concerns about corruption and public service delivery, highlight the complexities of transforming a society scarred by its past. These are not simple problems with immediate solutions, but rather multifaceted issues requiring sustained effort and commitment. Mandela himself was acutely aware that the work of building a truly democratic and just nation extended far beyond his presidency. His legacy, therefore, is not just about the triumphs achieved, but also about the unfinished tasks he bequeathed to future generations. It serves as a constant reminder that freedom from oppression is a beginning, not an end. The ideals of equality and justice, which he championed throughout his life, call for continuous vigilance and proactive engagement from all citizens. The enduring spirit of his struggle encourages South Africans to confront these contemporary challenges with the same courage and determination that characterized the anti-apartheid movement. His life's work implicitly asks for continued effort to ensure that the promise of a truly inclusive society, where opportunities are genuinely available to all, is fully realized. The path towards complete equity is long and arduous, yet Mandela's journey offers a powerful precedent that through perseverance, dialogue, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity, even the most formidable obstacles can ultimately be overcome. As the grand narrative of Nelson Mandela's impact on the world settles, it is important to gently draw back the focus to the individual, the man beneath the monumental icon. He was not born a legend, but grew into one through a life lived with extraordinary purpose, yet still imbued with the ordinary threads of human experience. Mandela, for all his monumental achievements, was a human being with the full spectrum of human characteristics. He possessed a sharp, and often self-deprecating humour that could disarm opponents and lighten the gravest situations, a trait that shone through even in the darkest days of his imprisonment. He was known for his elegant bearing and personal discipline, but also for a fiery temper in his youth and a certain stubbornness when convinced of a cause's righteousness. These were not flaws to diminish his stature, but rather aspects that underscored his humanity, making his journey all the more relatable and profound. He made decisions, some of which were later reflected upon with different perspectives, as is the nature of a life lived amidst immense pressure and evolving circumstances. His path was not without personal sacrifice and difficult choices, particularly concerning his family, a burden he carried with quiet dignity. These personal dimensions remind us that the struggle for justice was not an abstract concept for him, but a deeply personal endeavour, interwoven with his own hopes, sorrows, and triumphs. His unwavering spirit, which allowed him to endure decades of incarceration without bitterness, was perhaps his most defining personal characteristic. It was a spirit forged in the crucible of injustice, refined by solitary contemplation, and ultimately dedicated to the service of others. To see him not merely as a symbol, but as a man who learned, adapted, and grew throughout his long and arduous journey offers a more complete understanding of his enduring legacy. It is the story of an individual who, despite all odds, chose reconciliation over retribution, and in doing so transformed a nation and inspired the world. The resonance of Nelson Mandela's life continues to ripple outward, long after his physical presence departed this world. His journey offers not just a historical account, but a continuous source of lessons, echoing across generations and continents. These echoes speak of an enduring courage, a profound capacity for sacrifice, and the persistent, sometimes fragile possibility of deep-seated societal transformation. His early willingness to challenge an unjust system, even when it meant personal peril and the forfeiture of his freedom, stands as a testament to the power of conviction. This courage was not a fleeting impulse, but a sustained commitment, refined over decades of struggle and imprisonment. It reminds us that significant change often begins with the quiet determination of individuals to speak truth to power, regardless of the immediate cost. The sacrifices he made, not only of his liberty but also of a conventional family life, underscore the immense demands placed upon those who seek to dismantle systemic injustice. His story compels contemplation of the personal toll borne by leaders and activists, and the often unseen sacrifices that pave the way for progress. It is a quiet reminder that while the grand narratives of history focus on events, the human cost is always woven into the fabric of change. Perhaps the most profound echo of Mandela's life is the persistent lesson in the possibility of profound change. His leadership helped guide a nation from the brink of civil war to a peaceful, democratic transition, a feat that once seemed unimaginable. This transformation, while incomplete in its ongoing societal challenges, serves as a powerful beacon of hope. It suggests that even the most entrenched divisions can be bridged through dialogue, forgiveness, and an unwavering commitment to a shared, more equitable future. The echoes of his life invite us to consider how these principles might be applied to the challenges of our own time, urging continued reflection and action. As we gently conclude this long exploration into the life of Nelson Mandela, a quiet power emerges from the vast tapestry of his existence. It is not the power of thunderous rhetoric or military might, but a profound, enduring strength born of perseverance, principle, and an unwavering belief in human dignity. His story, in its entirety, offers a unique opportunity for peaceful contemplation, a chance to absorb the weight of history in a way that soothes rather than overwhelms. To trace his path from the rural landscapes of the Eastern Cape, through the vibrant activism of his youth, the long silence of Robben Island, and finally to the presidency of a transformed nation, is to witness the unfolding of a truly extraordinary human journey. There is a certain peace to be found in understanding such a profound narrative, in recognizing the intricate interplay of individual will and historical forces. It helps to settle the restless mind, offering perspective on the great arcs of human endeavour. The quiet power of Nelson Mandela's life lies in its capacity to inspire without demanding, to instruct without lecturing. It illustrates that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, the human spirit can not only endure but can also reshape the world around it. His legacy is a gentle reminder that reconciliation is possible, that justice can be pursued with both firmness and compassion, and that leadership can manifest as profound service. This peaceful understanding of his journey invites a deeper introspection, allowing the mind to drift into a state of calm. It encourages a quiet reflection on the values he embodied and the world he helped to create. As the narrative settles, one is left not with a sense of urgency, but with a lingering impression of hope, resilience, and the quiet, enduring power of a life lived with purpose. Now, as the gentle current of this narrative begins to recede, we invite you to drift into a state of profound rest. The long journey through Nelson Mandela's life, with its moments of struggle and triumph, its lessons of resilience and reconciliation, has now reached its quiet conclusion. Allow the thoughts and images that have accompanied you throughout this exploration to soften, to recede into the peaceful depth of your mind. There's no need to hold on to every detail, every date, or every name. Instead, allow the essence of his story to settle within you, a quiet resonance of courage, unwavering conviction, and the profound capacity for forgiveness. Let these insights, these deeply human qualities, accompany you as you transition from wakefulness to the gentle embrace of sleep. Picture the vast, star-filled skies over South Africa, the quiet strength of the land, and the enduring spirit of its people. Feel the calm that comes from understanding a life so fully lived, so purposefully dedicated to a cause greater than oneself. This journey through history was intended not to awaken, but to soothe, not to energize, but to quiet the mind. May the peace found in contemplating such a monumental life story now envelop you completely. Release any lingering thoughts of the day, any small concerns that may still reside. Let them dissolve like mist at dawn, leaving only a tranquil stillness. Carry with you, if you wish, the quiet inspiration of a man who chose unity over division, hope over despair, and freedom over subjugation. Or simply allow yourself to sink into the deep, restorative peace that awaits you. Rest now in this quiet moment. We wish you a most peaceful and undisturbed sleep. Good night.